The committee will come to order. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's hearing entitled Examining the Consequences of the EPA Actions on American Agriculture. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions. So, once again, good afternoon and welcome to today's hearing. American farmers and ranchers are the original conservationists. No one cares more for the environment than those whose livelihoods depend on it. They work tirelessly to ensure consumers have the safest, most abundant, most affordable food and fiber supply in the world. Agriculture is unlike any other industry where producers are at the mercy of many uncontrollable factors, including extreme weather, natural disasters, pests and diseases, input costs, and geopolitical unrest. What producers should not have to worry about is the federal government working against them. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has compounded this uncertainty with an unworkable regulatory regime that creates even greater costs and ambiguity for our farmers and ranchers. Because of the concerns this committee has heard from agricultural communities across the country, I was pleased to host a hearing last April with Administrator Regan to talk about the impact the administration's actions have on American agriculture. Now, that hearing marked the first time an EPA administrator appeared before the committee since 2016. At that hearing, Administrator Regan repeatedly indicated his willingness to work with farmers and ranchers as his agency promulgated rules and regulations impacting their livelihoods. While those statements appeared encouraging, since that hearing, the agency has announced an onslaught of rules and regulations that contradict these collaborative statements. Not only is the agency targeting specific crop protection tools that are important to production, it is also fundamentally changing the pesticide registration and registration review process. Last summer, the EPA published the draft Vulnerable Species Pilot Program and the draft Herbicide Strategy that will directly impact the ability of producers to utilize these critical tools and will cost billions to comply with. Even this administration's own U.S. Department of Agriculture expressed significant concerns with these actions. The Biden administration's attacks on American agriculture do not stop at crop protection tools. Earlier this year, the EPA published a proposed rule that significantly changes the effluent limitations guidelines for meat and poultry processing. While Biden's USDA spends millions to supposedly expand meat and poultry processing capacity, his EPA is simultaneously proposing rules that would shutter processing plants and impose significant compliance costs across industries vital to food affordability. These two examples where USDA is directly at odds with the EPA during this administration are further proof that the left hand does not know what the far left hand is doing and illustrates President Biden's continued failed leadership. Further, the EPA's exacerbated uncertainty surrounding what constitutes waters of the United States and is also considering a role to require reporting of livestock air emissions under the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. Unfortunately, the EPA's war on agriculture does not end here. Numerous other actions related to the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and other statutes within EPA's jurisdiction undermine the ability of producers to effectively manage their operations. Now, I appreciate the administrator's intent to work with the agriculture community. However, something is clearly broken with the current process. There's a disconnect between the rhetoric of this administration and the impact of the regulatory actions on the ground. This is why I extended an invitation last December for Administrator Regan to appear before the committee. Despite multiple requests since December, the Biden administration refuses to make Administrator Regan available for a request by the committee. Staff from the agency have even said that, quote, for Administrator Regan to appear a second time in 14 months would be unprecedented, end quote. I would argue the EPA's approach to punishing American farmers and ranchers through regulation under this administration is also unprecedented. Wrong-headed, and often heavy-handed regulations are exactly why producers do not trust the EPA and why I frequently hear it referred to as the excessive punishment agency. Simply put, the EPA under the Biden administration does not understand American agriculture or rural America, nor do they understand the consequences of their actions. I am disappointed in too many of Administrator Regan's misguided actions during his tenure, and even more disappointed by his failure to timely comply with the congressional requests for testimony. We look forward, at the administrator's convenience, of course, to making his trip down Pennsylvania Avenue to appear before the committee. With that said, the testimony of rural America through our esteemed witnesses, some traveling from across the country, cannot wait. And we thank all of you for your time and your engagement. With that, I'd now like to welcome the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for any opening remarks that he would like to make.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank our witnesses for coming today and providing their valuable testimony on the EPA. But before I get to today's hearing, I must express my deep concerns about Chairman Thompson's willingness to forego the Farm Bill. His stubborn refusal to engage on a bipartisan Farm Bill is irresponsible for the American people, especially our farmers who feed, fuel, clothe, and house our nation. Since our very divisive markup almost 2 months ago, there has been absolutely no progress on Chairman Thompson's bipartisan bill. This delay hurts the American people, especially in rural communities where our farms are, and it injects uncertainty into our nation's economies, both rural and urban. This willingness to delay the bill, to play election year politics, is selfish. It's disrespectful to our farmers who depend on us for their livelihoods to pass a bipartisan farm bill. And this is not just a farm bill. This is also a national security bill. Let us not be cute about this, ladies and gentlemen. Food security is most definitely now a national security. And Chairman Thompson knows this. He put it in the title of the Farm Bill's hearing. It is the Farm, Food, and National Security Act. And, you know, I've thought about this. I had a word with Speaker Johnson. My feeling is Speaker Johnson will not bring this bill to the floor for a vote because it was not written as a serious bill. It was written to be used as a campaign slogan, nothing more. Chairman Thompson can prove me wrong. All he has to do is bring to the floor and put it up to a vote. Now, in 2007, just 1 week after Democratic Chairman then, Colin Peterson, marked up his farm bill, I was there in 2007. And Speaker Pelosi brought it to the House floor. She brought it up in 2 weeks in July, which is the height now of appropriation season. Because she brought it up, because it was important, it was vital. We had urgency then. And since 2002, I've served on this committee. After being elected in 2022, I've gone through the farm bills. I've been the witness there. And I remember and I know what happened. And even when our Republican speaker, Speaker Boehner, who was a good friend of mine, and Ryan, each brought up Chairman Lucas's bill and Conway's prospective farm bills only a month after their markups. I was there then. We passed the most comprehensive bipartisan piece of legislation and biracial in the 1890s scholarship during that momentous building. And here we are, 2 months past our markup with the calendar running out. Ladies and gentlemen, August recess is right around the corner. We'll all be gone. We come back here in September, and a week is gone there. And then the new appropriations year starts 3 weeks later, October 1st. Where are my Republican friends? I'll tell you where. They're scheduling votes on refrigerators and dishwashers. Now, I don't have anything against household appliances, but we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about food security and national security. And I do not want any more excuses. I appreciate you all taking the time to hear my plea. It is time to fish or cut bait. America deserves this farm bill, this national security bill. Since the markup, Speaker Johnson has not indicated any intention of moving Chairman Thompson's bill. That's why I'm talking to you. We're urgent here. We've got to move. Treat this bill as the title says. It's the Farm Bill. But most importantly, it is a national security bill. And I want to thank you all for hearing this plea. Our farmers want action this year, not next. Our business community wants action now. This year, our families want action. And therefore, I encourage my Republican colleagues to let's stop playing politics and just face reality and let us move ahead as we should. And now I'd like to continue now with my remarks briefly for our excellent panelists here with the EPA. I want to thank you for coming, and I want you to know we're looking forward to having your explicit hearing. Thank you, Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. There's a lot I could say, but I'm not going to say anything. We're going to move ahead with this hearing and stay grounded in reality. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so our witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there's ample time for questions. Our first witness today is Mr. Jeff Kipley, Vice President of the National Farmers Union. To introduce our second witness today, I'm pleased to yield to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Alford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do appreciate your leadership in passing a bipartisan farm bill out of this committee some 2 months ago in this very room, unless I was dreaming. Mr. Chair, it is a distinct honor to introduce Director Chris Chen, Missouri's Director of Agriculture. Director Chen is a fifth-generation farmer from Clarence, Missouri, where she and her family raises hogs, cattle, corn, soybeans, and hay. She served as Missouri's Director of Agriculture since 2017 and chairs NASDA's Plant Agriculture and Pesticide Committee and the Midwest Association of State Departments of Agriculture. I'm also proud to know Director Chen on a personal level and to have worked with her throughout my time here in Congress. Director Chen, of course, spent the day with us, Mr. Chairman, a fun day at the Missouri State Fair just last year. And this is the same state fair where I've mentioned before that Jonathan Jackson milked a cow. We have photographic proof of that. And Representative Monica de la Cruz was there as well. Director Chen was a big part of the Farm Bill listening session that we had there, along with the governor and lieutenant governor. And I'm glad that we could hear about the concerns of our producers together and incorporate and fold those into this bipartisan Farm Bill. She is a champion for farmers and ranchers across the United States of America, and her knowledge and experience will be a vital part of today's discussion, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our third witness today is Mr. Gary Cooper, Chief Operating Officer of Cooper Farms. And our fourth and final witness today is Dr. Rebecca Larson, who is the Vice President, Chief Scientist, and Government Affairs for the Western Sugar Cooperative. To all of our witnesses, thank you so much for joining us today. You each have 5 minutes for your oral testimony. The timer in front of you will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. Mr. Kipley, please begin when you're ready.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Scott, and the members of this committee, thank you for the invitation to testify about EPA's impact on American agriculture. I am a farmer from Aberdeen, South Dakota, and I raise cattle, corn, and soybeans along with my wife, Rachel, and my father, John. Rachel and I have 4 children who participate in our farm operation. In addition to farming, our family operates a tax service business in Aberdeen in which we help family farmers complete their taxes. I also serve as Vice President of National Farmers Union. NFU is a grassroots organization with more than 230,000 members nationwide, and we advocate on behalf of family farmers, ranchers, and our communities. To build a successful business over the long term, I need my operation to be profitable. Sometimes I worry that the wrong federal regulations could harm my business, but I also know that it is important to have practical rules of the road by which everyone must abide. Properly designed and enforced regulations help protect us all from bad actors. I believe sustainability isn't only about profitability, but also about being a good steward of the land, air, and water. Reasonable environmental regulations can leave everyone better off if they are science-based, size and risk appropriate, clear, and easy to follow. EPA plays an essential role in protecting our environment, but the agency should do more to limit the impacts of its regulations on family farmers and ranchers. One of the best ways to do this is through regular engagement and partnership with farmers and communities. We commend the agency for creating the new Office of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. Farmers Union looks forward to working with the EPA and this committee to ensure our voices are heard clearly by the agency. EPA regulations and programs affect farmers in many ways, and I do not have time to touch on all these issues, but I would like to highlight a few. EPA's one issue is that it has been especially troubling for farmers is the definition of WOTUS, or Waters of the United States, under the Clean Air Water Act. The game of regulatory ping pong over WOTUS has gone on far too long. Like everyone else, we want simplicity and clarity. EPA says with its latest rulemaking that it has tried to establish a durable WOTUS definition, and we hope this issue will be settled soon. EPA has a very important role relating to crop production, protection products through FIFRA and PREA. Most farmers don't have the scientific expertise to evaluate crop protection products for safety, but we know these products are essential for our operations. EPA's rules, oversight, and labeling guidelines help keep us safe. I want to thank my South Dakota Congressman Dusty Johnson for introducing Agriculture Labeling Uniformity Act to reinforce the EPA's existing federal authority to regulate pesticides through FIFRA. If done right, legislative and regulatory actions can create economic development opportunities for rural communities and family farmers. That is certainly true of the renewable fuel standards. The RFS has been the most successful clean air fuel policy in the United States by making renewable fuel more affordable, creating jobs, and reviving rural economies, and reducing oil imports and air pollution. Future action by the EPA should support the program's growth and success, including through the upcoming RFS Set 2 rulemaking. We support EPA's move to year-round sales of E15, and there is still further growth to E30. We also appreciate the administration's focus on sustainable aviation fuel and hope the committee will support the adoption of agriculture feedstocks to the SAF production. EPA is an important ally in supporting farmers' rights to repair. It's incredibly important that farmers have the option to fix their own equipment or go to an independent mechanic of our choosing, just like everyone can with their cars and trucks. But some farm equipment manufacturers believe farmers cannot be trusted to repair their own equipment and use software to lock down certain repairs. This can cost us our crops when dealer-authorized repair is difficult to access, unavailable, or just too costly. Some farm equipment manufacturers and dealers have invoked the EPA's clean air regulation on tractor emission control systems as a reason to restrict farmers' access to independent repair. This claim is false and misleading. So NFU wrote EPA Administrator Regan last year asking him to clarify this issue. In his reply, Administrator Regan affirmed the EPA's regulations support independent repair and that independent repair doesn't facilitate emission tampering. We urge Congress to ensure the right to repair. I appreciate the committee's diligent oversight of the EPA. Thank you for holding this hearing and for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kipley. Appreciate your testimony. Mrs. Chin, please begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Scott, for the opportunity to testify today on such an important and timely topic. As you heard earlier, my name is Chris Chin. My husband and I farm in Missouri, fifth-generation family farmer. We've raised corn, soybeans, hogs, cattle, but most importantly, 2 children on our family farm. For more than 15 years, I've held leadership positions at the local, state, and national level, and I've been working to move my state's agriculture industry forward. I also serve on the board of the directors for the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. NASDA is a nonpartisan, nonprofit trade association representing the commissioners, secretaries, and directors of the 50 state departments of agriculture in the 4 U.S. territories. NASDA grows and enhances American agriculture through policy, partnerships, public engagement that is beneficial for all regions, people, and environments. Across the country, America's farmers and ranchers are facing growing economic and environmental pressures. As agriculturalists prepare for the important task of feeding more than 9 billion people by 2050, it's more critical than ever that federal regulations protect human health and our natural resources, while also enabling the food and agriculture industry to flourish. State departments of agriculture stand at a unique nexus because while we advocate for agriculture, we are also responsible for regulating programs within our states. This nexus allows NASDA to share an important perspective on the impact of federal regulations throughout the entire food supply chain. Regulations must be based on validated science and science-based risk assessments. To achieve this goal, the federal government must embrace states' co-regulatory role, lifting them up as true partners in the regulatory process, not simply stakeholders. Because of this, NASDA calls on EPA to uphold a renewed commitment to cooperative federalism. As the EPA issues new regulations, states are responsible for translating and educating producers on new obligations, while at the same time implementing, administrating, and enforcing these new provisions. The issue is compounded when the new regulations are overly burdensome and costly, threatening our nation's food security. To ensure that rules are feasible, state co-regulators must be involved early and thoroughly throughout the entire regulatory process. Unfortunately, we've seen the EPA fail to include cooperative federalism as it promulgates regulations. Recently, EPA released frameworks for pesticide regulatory decisions to come into compliance with the Endangered Species Act. The agency's failure to engage with co-regulators that are closest to producers is a major factor in those frameworks being unworkable for both pesticide applicators and state enforcement agencies. Another example of EPA's failure to include cooperative federalism is the broken cycle of rulemakings and legal challenges over the long-standing issue of waters of the United States. EPA's 2023 WOTUS rule significantly expanded the jurisdiction of federal government over wetlands and private property. It's been over a year since the Supreme Court's decision in Sackett v. EPA, and state departments of agriculture, farmers, ranchers, and landowners are still waiting on the agency to implement the decision into their WOTUS rule, and most importantly, recognize the critical role of states in regulating non-navigable waters. The livestock sector has also seen an increased regulatory burden over the past few years, most recently with EPA's proposed rule amending effluent limitation guidelines in small and mid-sized meat and poultry processing facilities. At a time when significant state and federal resources have been allocated to expand meat processing capacity, EPA has proposed a rule that could have a devastating impact on the sector and increase costs to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Despite these challenges, NASDA applauds the agency for the steps that it has taken to improve its relationship with agriculture stakeholders, including the recent formation of the Office of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, and for taking action in response to court decisions, such as issuing an existing stocks order for dicamba, which gave state regulators and growers the needed assurance they needed for the 2024 growing season. However, NASDA calls on EPA to fully embrace cooperative federalism throughout its rulemaking process and to prioritize a forward-thinking approach that enables growers to make thoughtful decisions for future growing seasons. When it comes to protecting the environment, agricultural producers and communities of every size rely on decisions from EPA that are based on sound science, collaboration, and transparency throughout each step of the process. It's time for EPA to invite agriculture generally and state departments of agriculture specifically into discussions early and often to find solutions that can elevate environmental protections and production agriculture. Agriculture is the backbone of our country, and we look forward to improved cooperation relationships between EPA and state departments of agriculture. And I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. Your testimony is greatly appreciated. Ms. Cooper, please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and the committee members. Of course, my name is Gary Cooper. Together with my brother Jim and sister Diane, we own and operate Cooper Farms. It's a diversified family livestock and poultry company, and we're in our 86th year of business. We are from Oakwood, Ohio, and in addition to pork, Cooper Farm also produces turkeys and eggs. I am proud of our long farming heritage and our commitment to our local community. I am here testifying today on behalf of the National Pork Producers Council, the trade association for the U.S. pork industry. I am also a past chairman of the National Turkey Federation, as is my brother Jim, as well as a past chairman of the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association and a former American Feed Industry Association board member. Perhaps most fitting, considering the topic of today's hearing, I am also a former member of EPA's Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Advisory Committee. Today, in a challenging time in the U.S. pork industry, last year hog farmers lost an average of $30 per head due to lower hog prices and very high production costs. We've had some relief in 2024, though we remain deep in the red, and many farmers continue to struggle financially. This is all happening while farmers nationwide contend with the ever-present threat of all kinds of animal diseases. As a poultry farmer, I'm also aware of the devastation that has been caused by avian influenza. And as a hog farmer, I worry about the massive economic harm that will occur if African swine fever manages to make its way into the U.S. Our industry continues to face activists and regulatory distractions on environmental performance. While activists are unavoidable, government agencies like EPA shouldn't be putting unnecessary burdens on struggling farmers like us. At Cooper Farms, like with many other pig farming businesses, We take compliance and environmental performance seriously. We always go above and beyond. Every farm in our system, regardless of the size, are required to meet the most stringent requirements set forth by the EPA and the state of Ohio. We are thankful for the strong working relationship that the industry has developed with the EPA over the years. I want to especially call out the creation of the EPA's new Office of Agricultural and Rural Affairs, which is serving to bring the EPA and the nation's rural communities and farm businesses together. First, we are very concerned about EPA's ELGs for meat and poultry processors. Even if EPA admits this rule will cause many processors to close, it is frustrating that the government would propose regulations putting large numbers of meat processors out of the business. This does create real economic hardships for those communities and the farmers who rely on them. Their closure means the loss of marketing opportunities for farmers, undermining both Congress and USDA's efforts to expand the number of small and medium local meat processors. It's unclear why, in the face of all this, EPA is rushing to complete the rulemaking and refusing to provide adequate opportunities for farmers to understand its impacts on the farms and the communities that provide meaningful comments to us. Second, EPA continues to face activist pressure to upend the long-standing regulatory rules that have governed both how farmers raise livestock and how we utilize the valuable manure nutrients on our farms on our cropland. In the face of this pressure, we are thankful to the EPA for its commitment to working with farmers to develop common-sense approaches to address water quality challenges. In particular, we have high hopes for the recently formed Animal Ag Water Quality Committee. Beyond these two issues, we remain very concerned about WOTUS. After the Supreme Court decision limiting EPA's authority over WOTUS, farmers were frustrated. The government seemed to be making jurisdiction determinations using a secret internal guidance that they refused to release to the public. EPA's continued efforts on trying to develop air emissions estimating tools seems to prove the point of farmers many years ago. There's no easy way to calculate emissions coming from our farms. Every farmer and every farm is different. 14 years after receiving data from the NAME study, EPA still can't tell the farmers how to reliably measure emissions. Perhaps it's time for Congress to step in once again and clarify that those reporting requirements are impossible to implement, unnecessary, and very burdensome. Finally, as the nation continues to face real challenges protecting our herds from all kinds of animal diseases, it makes little sense for the EPA to be working to eliminate two of the essential tools we have in that fight, and that are rodenticides and formaldehyde. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I welcome all your questions.
Mr. Cooper, thank you so much for your testimony. Dr. Larson, please begin when you're ready.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me. I'm Chief Scientist for Western Sugar Cooperative, owned by farm families growing sugar beets in Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana. I've spent 24 years working alongside farmers and have a doctorate in plant science. Therefore, I understand pesticides are essential to climate-smart farming and farm resiliency. Pesticides minimize food waste. 40% of food waste is due to crop losses from pests and diseases. Climate change is driving new and worsening epidemics, which will further increase food waste. Pesticides are key for climate-smart farming and maximizing crop productivity. Maximizing productivity prevents native land conversion, which is the most significant driver of biodiversity loss from agriculture. Plants comprise 80% of the food we eat. Therefore, protecting plant health and productivity protects human health. These are the reasons why actions of EPA that eliminate or fundamentally change the way pesticides can be used by American farmers causes significant concerns. I will illustrate my point with specific sugar beet examples. Sugar beets are 6 times more sensitive to pathogen losses and 40% more sensitive to weed pressure than other major crops. To deal with this disproportionate sensitivity, sugar beet farmers use integrated pest management to prevent crop losses. For example, seed planted by our farmers contains tolerance to 7 different pests and diseases. However, that tolerance is often incomplete, such that judicious use of pesticides is required to augment that tolerance and completely protect the crop. For example, even with the genetic tolerance to beet curly-top virus, crop losses averaged 20% annually in Wyoming until the introduction of seed-applied insecticides. Unfortunately, in other regions of the world, activist pressure has resulted in bans of these insecticides with devastating outcomes for their sugar beet farmers. EPA's own data shows how effective and critical these products are for our industry. Therefore, EPA was correct in denying the Center for Food Safety's treated article exemption petition and protecting streamlined access to treated seeds for American farmers. However, concerningly, EPA left the door open for other restrictions by announcing a treated seed rulemaking. This committee must insist that EPA not ignore their own data during this process, as done when revoking chlorpyrifos tolerances for sugar beets. EPA is a science-based organization which must let data dictate the process, especially their own. The impact of weeds on crop losses are well documented. With glyphosate, sugar beet farmers could finally control broadleaf weeds in a broadleaf crop. Better weed control allows our growers to implement climate-smart tillage practices, increasing our soil health and function by 6-fold and sugar beet yield by 35%. These sustainability advances were at risk with the emergence of a new pest, Palmer amaranth. This aggressive, prolific weed species exploded exponentially in 2022, causing significant sugar beet losses in both Colorado and Nebraska. I am grateful the EPA approved an emergency exemption for a highly effective herbicide. However, the process took 18 months and cost Colorado and Nebraska sugar beet growers over $8 million in lost revenue. Climate change is making issues like these more frequent and severe. Therefore, EPA must fully utilize all of its clear authority under FIFRA to deliver timely solutions to farmers. American farmers are in desperate need of new pesticides, yet EPA is imposing new regulations limiting the use of existing pesticides and delaying approval of new products. Though most impactful EPA actions relate to strategies set forth for compliance with EPA's Endangered Species Act obligations. Hailed as the most significant imposition of new regulations on the agricultural sector in generations, the EPA's draft herbicide strategy was completely unworkable for American farmers, especially small producers. The draft strategy overestimated exposure, species sensitivity, and critical habitat size, while it underestimated benefits of climate-smart practices and failed to include appropriate offset options. Much of this could have been avoided if EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs had better farmer engagement prior to the rollout. EPA's agricultural advisor, I know, is always ready to assist with engagement. Our industry submitted extensive constructive comments to EPA. Subsequently, EPA increased its engagement with USDA and producer groups, including ours. In their recent revised proposals, EPA is addressing some unworkable portions of the strategy, like erosion mitigation, but excessive spray buffer distances remain problematic. Without change, significant productive cropland will be lost to overly conservative spray buffers. For small production fields, including those used to produce sugar beet seed, spray buffers make this production impossible. This threatens entire industries, including ours. This committee must ensure the EPA includes reasonable, science-based adjustments to spray buffer requirements in its herbicide strategy prior to finalization in August. Farmers across the U.S. have shown their willingness to engage with EPA, as evidenced by extensive public comments. EPA must seek greater farmer engagement earlier in the process to ensure the U.S. remains a global leader in sustainable agriculture. Again, thank you for inviting me here today, and I look forward to taking questions.
Dr. Larson, thank you so much for your testimony today. Greatly appreciated. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members, and in order of arrival for those who joined us after the hearing convened. You'll be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. I'm going to hold a pretty tight gavel on that 5 minutes just because we have so many members that are engaged in this hearing. And I know we'll have a vote series coming up here in the future sometime. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. In the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress created FIFRA interagency working group to improve the consultation process under the Endangered Species Act for pesticide registration and registration review. Now, despite this direction, the Biden administration failed to utilize the FIFRA IWG in the development of the Endangered Species Act work plan and subsequent strategies. As a result of this failure, I joined Ranking Member Scott, Chairwoman Stabenow, and Ranking Member Bozeman earlier this year in sending a letter to the EPA requesting a special meeting between FIFRA IWG and stakeholders directly impacted by these actions. Without objections, I would like to insert that letter into the record I'd also like to thank Ranking Member Scott for recognizing the serious concerns surrounding these proposals and joining that effort. Director Chen, Dr. Larson, and Mr. Kipley, how can the EPA better utilize this working group moving forward so that the impacts to agriculture are minimized?
Chairman, if I may, I think one prime example is with the draft herbicide strategy. The EPA staff tried in a fairly good attempt to be able to understand whether growers could comply with the new draft herbicide strategy by creating what they called a case study, which was looking at what types of conservation practices are standard in an area over what extent of acreage. However, if USDA would have been involved in that process earlier on, they have the internal expertise from the direct contact with growers to know which of those practices are duplicative and therefore would never be implemented by the same farmer on the same land, and which ones are truly additive. They also bring to the table the fact that it's not just one crop scenario that growers are looking at to manage their farm, it's the entire rotation, which was completely absent from the EPA strategy. So in terms of that IWG, I think it's very critical to get EPA at the table much faster, or sorry, USDA at the table much faster.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Chin?
In my opinion, I feel like the only solution is to bring everybody together in the agriculture community to the table to be involved in the process with EPA every step of the way. Cooperative federalism works. We've seen it in the past, and we think that is a great starting point to make sure that all voices and concerns are heard moving forward. At the heart of every farmer and rancher, they want to protect that farm and that legacy to pass on to the next generation, but they need to be able to do it in a timely manner that is affordable for their family and their farm and their operation, because no two family farms are alike.
Very good. Ms. Cooper, any thoughts?
So I just know from being in the farming business out in Western Ohio that any kind of regulations and whatever that come at us, if it's not discussed with us out on the farm, sometimes it's very confusing for us. And so the collaboration is very important all the way around, for sure.
Absolutely, bringing everybody to the table. Great. The Biden administration is proposing a new rule to expand meat and poultry product effluent limitations guidelines. This flawed proposal would have significant compliance costs and close multiple processing facilities. Any government regulation that closes a single facility is one too many. Mr. Cooper, you're concerned that EPA's new proposal will add more red tape to an already heavily regulated industry, making it difficult for smaller processors to comply. Ms. Book, are you concerned with that?
Sure I am. I have a couple of examples. So we have two plants in Ohio. One is our turkey harvest plant and one's a cooked meats plant. And they both have separate types of sewage systems. In our turkey harvest plant in St. Henry, Ohio, it's a pre-treatment plant that we work very closely with the city of St. Henry. We've been there since May of 1988, and it's an indirect setup that we work with them, and then they take it on through their system. And so for all those years, we've had a true partnership with them. They've invested money, we've invested money. And so in that situation, having ELGs come in and tell us to do something different would completely disrupt that system. And then our other plant that we have has a self-contained wastewater treatment plant, and we just got done renovating that all with the proper permits, EPA, Clean Water Act, and everything. And that is totally all in-house. We're not even going through the city. So having ELGs come at us at different levels would be very confusing and not helpful to us.
So very quickly, do you believe that this would lead to a concentration within the industry?
Well, sure. So, at least in our scope of scale of our company, we have the wherewithal, and we have the departments, and we have an environmental manager, and we can handle all that. And so that works, but there's many small companies, many small processors that wouldn't have that ability, nor maybe the financial backing to be able to handle this coming at them.
Very good. Thank you so much. Now I'd please recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kipley, you made an important statement in your testimony, and I quote, you said, "Sometimes I worry that the wrong rules could put me out of business." But I also know that having reasonable regulation, practical rules of the road that everyone must abide by is very important. Properly designed and enforced regulations help protect family farmers like me from bad actors who use harmful and exploitative practices. Very good statement. And I'd like for the others to comment on this as well. How do you relate your statement here as it relates to the waters rule, where the regulators come in and regulate the navigable so-called waters on farmland? I'm very concerned about that. I grew up on a farm. Farmers must always have water. They have droughts. They got animals to water and keep alive. I grew up on a tobacco farm. You got to have water when you plant the plant. It's the only plant here where you got to put the water in with the plant. Tell me how this is working. We've had a lot of debate on this, and I want to know from you all what y'all think about that rule. Yeah, you first, Mr. Watt.
Me first?
Yes,
Yep.
please.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it's important that we protect our waters. Obviously, clean water is important to all of us. Our families are drinking the same water that your neighbors are. So it's important to us that we protect our water. However, when we overreach and start to hold back water from the livestock, it truly can end your business. If you can't get access to water for your cattle, bad things happen. We just had a neighbor recently have a water tank malfunction in his pasture, and I think he lost 9 head.
Are you supportive of this federal water us program, regulators coming in? Some of them are fining our farmers, costing them money.
I think that it's a very touchy issue, but no, I don't want them. I'm like anybody else. You don't like somebody to come in and tell you that you can't do it this way or that way, but there is a need to protect the water.
Yeah, the others, please. What is your opinion, ma'am? Miss, I will go down the line. Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, we at the State Department of Agriculture, we feel like we need to have a voice in that conversation on a state level. Non-navigable waters, which is what you normally find on farms and ranches across the United States, should be left to the jurisdiction of the states because they are the people who are closest to the farming and ranching community. Every state has different challenges and obstacles to overcome when it comes to farming and ranching, and we feel like state regulators have the opportunity to cater to the needs of the agriculture industry to make sure that while we're protecting and making sure we have safe and clean water, we're making sure that agriculture's needs are met at the same time. So we feel like the state voice has been left out of this decision, and we encourage more cooperative federalism to make sure that states are involved when it comes to non-navigable waters like you find on our farms and ranches.
Good to know. Mr. Cooper?
So we actually, some of our farmer operations, about a third of them are in the western Lake Erie water basin area. And we do all kinds of things, filter grass strips, and we don't apply manure on frozen ground. So we do all kinds of things that part of it's permitting, part of it's just good common sense to protect not only our ground, put the right amount of manure on with the soil test, but also to protect the water. But also what we would like is that we have an issue that we're short of water in 2 of our facilities, and we'd rather have the government come in and help us with that.
Yes, ma'am, you're fine on this.
Yeah, waters of the U.S. is definitely outside my area of expertise, but I would like to take a moment to talk about this bad actors idea. I just want to clarify for this committee that farmers use pesticides in a very responsible manner, primarily because they're extremely costly. So growers are not going to go around and spray products that don't need to be sprayed. Fertilizers as well are incredibly costly, even more so with inflationary effects. So growers are taking the responsibility and leading with integrated pest management to try and protect not only the waters on their ground, but also their land.
Well, thank you very much. You're back, Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Lucas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My constituents have made it abundantly clear to me that compliance with the Endangered Species Act, or ESA, continues to be a nearly impossible task. Oklahoma farmers and ranchers are more than willing to work with regulators to find solutions that make sense for everyone. After all, everyone in this room knows that farmers are the original environmentalists. However, the EPA's recent herbicide strategy creates buffer zone requirements that have caused some unease back home. And the excessive buffer zone distance requirements remain unworkable for many producers and could lead to a significant loss of usable acres. So, Dr. Larson, in your written testimony, you touched on a possible solution you proposed to the EPA. Could you elaborate on this and share if the EPA seems, this is a big phrase, seems receptive to your approach?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I can't gauge how receptive EPA is to the approach that we've put forward because we haven't gotten much feedback. At times I've likened it to screaming into a void, trying to expect to get a response. Although that engagement has become better when it comes to erosion mitigation. We haven't gotten any feedback yet, but have a meeting scheduled on the spray buffer modifications. So right now, the EPA has set a different standard for the amount of what they call a depositional fraction, or how much of a product they're willing to tolerate moves off the farm, using a model that already overestimates what that drift is going to be. If they were to apply an equal standard across the board, it could reduce spray buffers 50 to 90% and still be incredibly protective. So for example, right now there's a 100-foot requirement for any ground application. If they applied the same standard to ground application as they do to aerial application, that would take that 100 feet down to 10 feet, which we know is still very protective of critical environments, because farmers across my area routinely split fields between sugar beets and corn. They'll spray things on the corn that should kill the beets and spray things on the beets that should kill the corn, yet they can control that drift over 22 inches, which is how far apart those two crops are planted. So even 10 feet would be way more than would be necessary to protect critical species and habitats.
Mr. Cooper, I want to pivot briefly and touch on the EPA effluent guidelines that are affecting your industry and my producers back home. Many people in Oklahoma and around the U.S. fear that their operations would close if this rule went into effect. And you stated in your written testimony that EPA's estimated number of plant closures is far below the NPPC's estimation. Can you expand on the discrepancy between the NPPC's findings and the EPA's, and where you believe the EPA is missing the mark, if they are?
I actually have no knowledge about that discrepancy on that. I just do know that I would be in agreement that it is going to affect a lot of small processors all across America. And just like in the example when I was talking about in my own plant situation, having this direct relationship with our local city, and it's been going on for 36 years, working perfectly. In the other situation, we have our own in-house treatment system. So we can afford and can do that kind of stuff, and it's worked out really well. But I just believe that when you think about a lot of small processors and these grants are going to try to get more companies to start up, this is going to cause less facilities for our swine industry to be able to take their hogs to for getting processed.
Thank you. And before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer a note of thought that the Farm Bill process has been, always will be, a challenging process, and that the patience of the leadership of the committee sometimes is required to a degree that's almost biblical in nature. And I appreciate your patience, and I would note for the historic record that many times the challenges in my 30 years on this committee have not come within the committee, but dealing within leadership and the outside groups. If we can't pull together, as we have in the past, then I'm very concerned about where we go. But I do have complete faith in your sincerity and your intensity and your focus to accomplish the mission for the common good. And I thank you for that. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for holding this important hearing, and I think we all pray that we can come together on a farm bill before the end of the year. Having said that, I was speaking to a group farm leaders earlier today, and I represent one of the larger agricultural areas, not only in California, but therefore in the country. I think that farmers, ranchers, dairymen, and women are critical in so many different ways, but they're also stewards of the environment. I think many of us feel that way. The challenges of coming together with local, state, and federal policy to ensure that agriculture remains what it is, which is a national security issue. It's an international security issue. And with 4% of the nation's population directly involved, we don't often think of it in that way, but it is. And so what I would like to do is ask a few questions related to our witnesses. Obviously, climate change and other factors are impacting our producers throughout the country. Mr. Kipley, in your earlier, it's Kipley, right?
Yes.
You talked about WOTUS and the challenges of the ping pong, as you described it. I would call it a political football, but where do you think we ultimately find the common sense solution so that we avoid the ping-ponging effect that you described?
You know, I think it's going to take scientific, we got to trust the science, we got to work together at all levels. Like my colleague to the left here said, the state needs to be involved in this process. We need farmer input, and we need to come up with a common sense solution. And I think that's where we're going to ultimately land. Unfortunately, the hardest part about the WOTUS has been the back and forth that we've experienced over the last number of administrations. We go from one extreme to the other, it seems like, and we don't really land anywhere in the middle. And I think that's where it's going to have to be, get all the parties together and come up with a good plan. That
Put them in a room and apply common sense and don't let them leave until we've gotten there, huh?
Yeah.
Dr. Larson, in your testimony, you talked about the importance of avoiding the patchwork of regulations. In California, we've had some of the strictest pesticide regulations and herbicide regulations in the country. We've tried in the past to create an effective harmonization between our efforts at the state and federal level. Could you further explain the critical importance on how we try to avoid that patchwork and try to, I know one size doesn't fit all clearly, but and certain states take different directions, but could you comment?
Thank you, Congressman. I've lived that firsthand in Boulder County, Colorado. The county owns a lot of public open space that's used for agricultural production. So several years ago, they took it upon themselves, the county commissioners, to ban the use of GMOs, primarily because of their reliance on glyphosate, and ban the use of neonicotinoids based off of some activist promises that there'd be a better way to farm. And so that really put a shock to the system. They spent millions of dollars in taxpayer dollars trying to find a different method that would make it work, and then all of a sudden pivoted towards focusing on soil health and recognizing that some of these pesticides and technologies from a breeding perspective were important for that. My city in which I live in has given up using pesticides for controlling weeds and replaced it with 200 goats. That's not been really effective at managing the weeds along the waterways, and what they don't understand is that the weeds don't respect boundaries. So even though there are ag exemptions where people can use pesticides on their own privately owned ground, all of the riverbanks along the bike trails are overridden by kochia. That seed drops into the waterways, it goes into the irrigation canals, and it goes into the farms.
My time is ending here, but I think common sense and trying to get a concurrence on best science is always the challenge when you're trying to harmonize regulations and maintaining food safety and worker safety clearly are the goals. More to be said, but not enough time. Mr. Cooper, your description of your rendering operations and process sounds similar to some of the things we're dealing with in California. Do you use a rendering operation?
Yes, we do. We've had a long-term relationship with Windsor & Sons, which is a local renderer, and it's, I would call it a symbiotic.
What percentage of the waste would you guess are able to be recycled? I mean, give me a ballpark.
Through our live turkey harvesting plant, I think it's about 15 to 20% runs through them, and then they render it, and then we purchase some of that back from them. And so it's been a great relationship, and we would have a really tough time if we didn't have that renderer right next to us, which are literally about 45 minutes away. So
yeah, we've done some similar things.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, but obviously more work needs to be done.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize Congressman Austin Scott for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to submit a letter for the record from 21 ag organizations, including the American Soybean Association and Cotton and U.S. Peanut Federation, requesting the EPA extend the comment period for the proposed interim decision to cancel all uses of acephate except for tree injections by 30 days.
Without objection.
Ms. Larson, I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I do want to thank you for making the statement that you made. I mean, farmers don't just wake up in the morning and decide that they want to spray a pesticide or a herbicide and spend the money on those chemicals or on the diesel that it takes to spray them unless it's going to lead to crop yield increases, which are necessary for our food supply in this country. And I think that gets lost sometimes in the discussion when you're dealing with activist environmentalists. They think that the farmer just wakes up in the morning and wants to go spend money on diesel and wants to go spend money on chemicals, and it's just false. If it's not going to lead to higher yields for our farmers, then they're not going to go waste the money. They don't have the money to waste. And you made a statement similar to that, and I appreciate you stating that. And these liberal activists, I personally believe, are funded by the Chinese Communist government, who's been very smart in the way they have dipped into the seed supply and the chemical supply that it takes to grow the crops that we all depend on for our food supply. With that said, Director Chin, many specialty crop growers in my district rely on a variety of crop protection tools to protect their fruits and vegetables from damaging pests and diseases. The use of many of these tools is possible through the work of the RR4 project, which develops the data needed to add additional uses to labels and establish tolerances. Can you talk about the importance of registering additional tools for specialty crops and other minor uses?
Sure. We share your concern. We need to make sure that we have tools in the toolbox that fit every size farmer, whether they're a specialty farmer or a large farmer. We need to make sure that there is the ability to change a label when necessary to meet the needs that, say, a specialty farmer is experiencing at that time. We also need to make sure that the burdensome regulations that are coming down from the government are not so burdensome that they force farmers to stop using practices that are good for the environment and protecting their family operation.
Let me say this, because I know you're at the state. I've served for 14 years in the state legislature in Georgia, and I served under multiple governors, both Democrat and Republican. And I found that whether I had a Democrat or Republican administration at the state level, the people that were operating the state agencies were fact-based decision makers that were solution-oriented and recognized the needs of the citizens. I don't feel that same way about the people in the federal agencies. And so I appreciate you and the role that the states play in making sure that we have the balance. And I think that the states do a much better job of it than bureaucratic overlords in the federal agencies. Dr. Larson, many farmers in my district rely on herbicides like glyphosate. In fact, I'll probably use some this weekend around my house, even though I'm not farming. Dicamba and atrazine when implementing voluntary incentive-based conservation practices like cover cropping and reduced or no-till that helps sequester carbon in the soil. Can you elaborate on the importance of using herbicides to implement conservation practices and how the reduction of these chemicals is going to hurt conservation?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. This is one of my favorite talking points. For sugar beets, the introduction of glyphosate tolerance has been a quantum leap change for our growers. They're finally able to control the weeds. It increased yields 35%, cut fuel consumption 50%, cut greenhouse gas emissions 40%, and has cut water consumption by 30%. I mean, that's true sustainable intensification.
Good for the environment.
If we were to lose that tool, it would be devastating for our growers. It takes decades to sequester carbon in the soil, but it takes minutes to lose it. And so if we lose those tools and have to go back to intensive tillage to maintain weed control, all of that carbon's lost back to the atmosphere.
You answered my next question, which what is the impact on conservation if we lose those chemicals? But most of the farmers that I know want to use a system that's good for the environment. They don't just wake up in the morning. None of the farmers I know wake up in the morning and try to find a way to use more diesel or more chemicals. And I appreciate all of you being here.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Dr. Adams for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to the ranking member as well for hosting the hearing today, and to our witnesses. Thank you for your testimony. It's probably not surprising that I want to talk about the Farm Bill in the context of today's conversation, not only because we still have not passed one, but because it would, as reported out of the committee, undermine many of the important protections to human and environmental health that are up for discussion today. I find it a bit funny that we always hear about crop protection so much in our ag meetings when we ought to be talking about protecting human health. It's one thing to have a serious conversation about equipping our farmers with the tools they need to grow, but it's another thing to undo regulations that are already on the books, which is what the preemption-style language tucked into the Title 10 of the Farm, Food, and National Security Act would do. As a former state legislator of 20 and a half years and the ranking member of the Workforce Protection Subcommittee on Ed and Workforce, I have grave concerns about what it would mean for the Farm Bill to undo state and local level pesticide regulations, especially as those regulations serve to protect all kinds of people, but especially farm workers and other applicators. If the goal is truly for uniformity in pesticide regulations, then setting a higher floor would be one way to do that. The Farm Bill, as it's written, stacked the deck against food and farm workers, none of whom are represented on the panel today. But I have to say that the term regulated community was new to me. I do feel that it's unfortunate that we did not hear from any members of communities, often low-income communities of color, who endure the cumulative impacts of the products and the practices under scrutiny today. So while I do appreciate the witnesses' testimony saying that we need to pay greater attention to the regulatory system governing pesticides, I don't agree with the idea that this attention should devolve into further weakening regulations and further exposing residents of my district and state to levels of chemical inputs not tolerated in many other nations. Agriculture has many unique exemptions to environmental laws and regulations other industries don't face. For example, we heard how air reporting requirements for animal waste are exempt under CERCLU and EPCRA for certain farms. But I want to ask a few questions that acknowledge such carve-outs. And so if we want the EPA to do a better job, which I think we should all want that, I'm more than a little puzzled as to how a 20% cut to their funding would allow for that. And that's what we went through yesterday's markup and appropriation. So, Mr. Kipley, thanks for your testimony. I do want to hone in on the PFAS. One significant issue with PFAS is that they are persistent in the environment, which is an issue in my state, North Carolina. There's no stranger to that. But how is this impacting farmers? And what can we do to remediate these issues? And how is the NFU engaging in this conversation?
So personally in South Dakota, we haven't dealt a lot with PFAS, whether it's just because we haven't done the studies to find that it's there or it's not there. But NFU, I guess our belief there is that we need to make sure the farmers are held harmless the best we can in this process. This is done to them, not, done by companies creating the stuff and not by the farmers themselves. So as far as that goes, we just want to make sure the farmers are held harmless and help them out.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Chen, you raised EPA's proposed rule on effluent limitation guidelines and their potential effects on market competition. The Biden administration has worked to increase competition in the processing sector, including by increasing the number of plants. So is NSDA supportive of those pro-competition efforts, and do you feel that it's important to balance the need for safe and affordable drinking water for local communities in the discussion about effluent guidelines?
Thank you for that question. We are very supportive in expanding the small and mid-sized meat processing facilities. Our state legislature actually put $20 million into that effort for a grant program. So we feel that it is very important to give our farming community a choice of where they send their animals to go be processed. We know that these small local businesses are doing everything within their means to make sure that they protect the water supply, but we really feel like the local state governments need to be involved in that decision-making process because we are the people closest to those processors, and we want to do everything that we can to help them, including rendering and things like that that help us recycle those resources.
Thank you, ma'am. I have a question for Dr. Larson, but Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back and I'll just submit that in writing. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5
Thank you,
minutes.
Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. I wanted to direct this to Director Chin and Dr. Larson on the use of, the control materials we use in agriculture. I'm a farmer in my real life as well, and so we certainly understand how, as Mr. Scott was mentioning, we don't just use these materials for kicks. They're expensive, and you have hold periods. You have things you have to do to accommodate it. We're glad to have the materials, but I don't want to use them any more as necessary either. And the organic market is an important one. It's one I support, but it's also limited too. So when you find that the vast majority of our crops grown in this country do use some level of weed control or insect control in order to be viable, then we have to acknowledge that, or we're not going to be the breadbasket for the country and the world that we have been. So it's really not debatable. So a piece of info I have here is that a study out of University of Arkansas says that the production of corn and other commodities could decline as much as 70% without the use of these materials, without having them available. So when they're highly regulated, well, I should say not highly over-regulated. Yes, they're well regulated, and there's reasons for that. We all get that as long as we can still work through the maze. But farmers' yields will suffer if they're regulated to the point that they cannot use these materials or new ones cannot be developed. So you would end up using more land to grow the same amount of crop at less profit per acre. I know profit is a dirty word in some places around here, but if you're not making a living, if you're not in the black, then you're not going to be there very long, no matter who you are. So you're going to use more land, you're going to perhaps use more water in order to grow the same amount of crop, and then so the market has to get more expensive for the crops as well. So so at the same time we're having to use more land and more water assets. This goes against what the environmental groups tell us they want. They want to save more water for fish or for environmental purposes. They want more land to be conserved for wildland, or heaven knows, covering up with solar panels like in the San Joaquin Valley, which seems to be their idea of solar farms. So, and then harming the breadbasket that we have in this country. So, getting to the question, Director Chin and Dr. Larson, are you just put it right at the bottom line here, have you been seeing farmers go out of business because they can't keep up with the cost of these regulations and the price of the materials themselves, since they have a narrower window of market?
Absolutely. That is a huge concern, especially for our Missouri farmers. Our smaller farmers, our new beginning farmers, do not have the equity, and taking away one of the tools they have in their toolbox is going to have a detrimental impact on their bottom line and their ability to meet their debt service that they need to with their local lending institution. Our fear is that the local lending institution is going to call their notes due, and it's going to put them out of business. We need to make sure that they have many choices when it comes to crop protection tools, and we need to make sure that the rules and regulations in place are things that are workable. That's why we encourage the state departments of ag being able to be a part of these decisions with EPA, so we can represent what that small farmer and at the boots on the ground are seeing when they try to implement those regulations as written.
Yeah, so they'll be gone. Dr. Larson.
When Palmer amaranth exploded into our markets in Colorado and Nebraska, I had a farmer tell me that his yield went from 32 tons per acre for his sugar beets to 11 tons overnight. That weed grows from a seed to setting seed in under 2 weeks. It grows 2 inches a day. If we lost access to herbicides, not only that are important to our sugar beet crop, but for the crops that we grow in rotation, our guys will go out of business. And it took a year too long to get the emergency exemption that we needed for getting that weed back under control.
Yeah, well, what we face, and I'm a rice grower in real life, and we face, some materials that have been just outright banned, or other ones that aren't approved soon enough, like you're talking about, where, we'll have certain weed materials that they're working, but the crop, the weeds develop a resistance. And so we have to rotate amongst maybe 5 or 6 different materials, these 1 or 2 this year, and move them around for the next year, use something else. And then we're still not getting 100%, but we're at least keeping at it. So it really is difficult to keep the materials alive when the EPA is trying to stop them. So with these mandates, I'm not sure how we continue to produce the way American farmers and American consumers are expected to. So thank you for that, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now, please recognize the gentlelady from Ohio, Congresswoman Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our expert panel for being here. Your perspectives are very helpful. Every day, millions of Americans rely on our aviation industry to travel, recreate, and move goods. But historically, flying has ranked as one of the highest producers of carbon emissions. Thankfully, Americans and American farmers are innovators, and the sustainable aviation fuel industry continues to grow and develop. And as my home state of Ohio has long been called the birthplace of aviation, I am thrilled to see it emerging once again as a leader in producing the feedstocks needed for sustainable aviation fuel. Ohio ranks in the top 10 national producers of corn and ethanol, proving that our farmers can deliver what we need to build a strong, clean fuel industry. I am proud to have supported the historic climate innovations in the Inflation Reduction Act, including the creation of a $1.25 per gallon tax credit for producers of qualifying aviation fuels. And I have been glad to see the interagency collaboration to get this right and make sure that farmers, industry, and consumers are all benefiting. So, Mr. Kipley, you shared your organization's support for the administration's Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge. How is this emerging industry impacting the livelihood of the National Farmers Union membership?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the next level of ethanol. If we look back to prior to ethanol plants coming on board, we've seen our small towns dwindling at a very rapid rate. There wasn't a lot of industry moving into rural South Dakota to start new businesses up. And within 50 miles of my hometown, we have 4 ethanol plants, which all employ probably 20, 30 people apiece, not to mention the increased products to producers of the corn. And then we also have an AGP soybean processing plant right there as well. Again, employing another 20, 30 people and increased profits. And I just see this as continuation for us in this product. And the one thing I will always say is, if you think something can't be done, tell an American farmer. They'll figure out how to get it done, and we'll do it well. So we're up for the challenge.
Thank you for that. In the lead up to our Farm Bill markup, we heard time and time again in this committee how important strong conservation incentives and practices are. And Democrats on this committee fought hard and will continue to fight to protect conservation programming and dollars. I know many of you on the panel today have engaged with these conservation programs firsthand. So I would like to ask you all, how do you see the role of agriculture in the production of sustainable aviation fuels? And what conservation practices are you implementing on your farm to support this industry while ensuring environmental sustainability? Okay.
So on our farm, we've been no-till for years. However, some of the current regulations will not allow us to meet everything that's there. We need to open it up so that farms in the northern part of the U.S. can more easily access these benefits. Cover crops just don't work in our part of the world. I'm 26 miles from the North Dakota border, and by the time we get corn out, normally there's snow on the ground. We're always hopeful we have the beans out before the snow hits. So we're limited in some aspects of the current rules, but there are a lot of other things that we can do. CSP program is widely used in our area. We have a lot of no-till in the area due to water, lack of water in our area. So we'll continue to do environmentally friendly farming.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think it's important that we remember that our farmers are price takers and they're not price makers. And so they want to do what's right for their farming community and their farms and ranches to pass it on to that next generation. But meeting unfunded mandates that are passed on from the federal government make it very challenging for them. They need to be able to implement those practices in a way that is feasible for their family and their operation. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten about. I also think it's important that they have every tool available for them. In the state of Missouri, our agriculture in this very southern boot hill is very different than the northwest corner. There's over a month to 6 weeks difference in planting seasons because of that. And so, as Mr. Kipley said, it might work in the boot hill area of our state to use cover crops, but when the northwest portion of our state is late harvesting, they don't have that opportunity to sow that cover crop, and they should not be punished for that because many times they've implemented terraces and other practices that are conservation minded to make sure they protect their farm.
Thank you. All right, well, it looks like my time has expired, and I just want to close with this, if I may, Mr. Chair. I am committed to working with my colleagues and alongside the Biden-Harris administration to take real steps to lead in the clean energy transition, support American farmers, and to combat the threats of climate change. And with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. Now recognize Mr. Boss for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for being here and coming before the committee to discuss all the EPA's issues that are out there right now and how it impacts Americans' agriculture. It's really disappointing that Administrator Regan wouldn't give the Congress the same respect. So going into my first question, you know, many of you have talked about the EPA's handling of the waters of the United States, and if we say it's been sloppy at best is the way we can describe it. There's been so many back and forth ways that all of a sudden they're implementing WOTUS this way, then they're implementing this way, then they create a lot of confusion. And to tell you the truth, my constituents from deep southern Illinois, they're pretty well fed up. Farmers in southern Illinois have tried to get the federal government to give an answer, which they don't give, or when they do give, it's one side and then they flip back. So I don't know what this administration is trying to do now that they've got a court ruling why they don't go ahead and move forward and realize that they're not for their green agenda, they're for the law, the way the law is supposed to be handled. So that being said, now after a year after this Supreme Court ruling, nothing has really changed, thanks to in large part to nobody but the EPA. American farmers and many others are still in a state of limbo and confused as they continue to wait for what new WOTUS rules that will be fully implemented. So, Director Chen, let me ask from a state perspective, and I was state legislator for 20 years in the state of Illinois on the Ag Committee for 20 years. How are farmers expected to know how to comply with the law when the definition is still so unclear, and what resources are available to assist them in that process?
Thank you for that question. That's one of the biggest challenges our farming community faces is how do they comply with WOTUS? They reach out to us in the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and we don't have good answers for them because we as state regulators can't find the answers either. We've reached out to EPA. They too do not know how to help us in advising the agriculture community to move forward. In Missouri, we are still going under the pre-2015 WOTUS definition because we don't have that clarity, and that is what our farming community needs. They need clarity, and they need something that is easy to understand and easy to implement. And we cannot forget the state's role in making sure we protect the non-navigable waters. The farming community would much rather deal with someone from the state than they would from the federal government.
Thank you. You know, it's really no secret that the EPA pesticide review process is broken, and it's gotten worse in recent years. Currently, EPA meets next to none of the statutory PRIA regulation deadlines. In turn, this delay in new innovative products from reaching the farm when they need it the most. Now, to make the solution worse, EPA has recently insisted on doing their draft Endangered Species Act assessment in the House. This is only added to these delays and consumes limited staff resources, adding months or years to the regulating process. For any of the witnesses at the table, can you speak to the importance of streamlining EPA's pesticide review process, focusing staff and resources on issuing the area and actually getting the rules out?
Congressman, if I may, I could address
Please.
that question. So when we had Palmer amaranth come onto the scene in Colorado and Nebraska, we needed an urgent solution, and the EPA has an emergency exemption option under the Section 18, where they had full statutory authority to approve an unregulated product for our growers to use, yet it took them 18 months to get that approval. And I can tell you that climate change is worsening disease and pest epidemics. This situation is going to get much more urgent for farmers. They need to get tools in a timely fashion in order to address these worsening disease and pest problems if we have any chance of maintaining the supply that we need of food.
Congressman, I'd like to add to that. I totally agree with everything you said there. Along with that, back in March, 28 trade organizations sent a letter to the EPA on this whole WOTUS question and asking them for, asking questions and everything. And in the past 3 months, there's been absolutely no response to that. And like, how hard is that? So many organizations send a letter, you got a few questions, it's probably take, an hour for somebody to answer them, they don't even do that. So it just goes along with what all that we were saying.
Yeah. Well, my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I do want to close with one statement here. I do wish that the EPA themselves were here. And the reason being is because there's, like all government agencies, they're supposed to be here to help, not to hinder. And unfortunately, this is a agency that has continued to grow like all bureaucratic agencies do. And unfortunately, to be an agency that punishes people doesn't really help them. So thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I assure him that we will extend another invitation to Administrator Regan. This one may be a little firmer to have him before the committee. Please recognize Dr. Caraveo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Scott. Thank you for hosting this hearing this morning. And to our witnesses, thank you for being here to provide your testimony. Dr. Larson, I especially appreciate you joining us from Colorado. I represent leading producers of sugar beets in Colorado, and last year I expressed concern to Administrator Regan about the lack of effective U.S.-approved crop protection tools to address the aggressive invasive weed Palmer amaranth, which was causing serious economic losses to our sugar beet growers, as you have said, Dr. Larson. And I was glad to hear when the EPA did eventually grant Colorado counties approval for a tool for the 2024 growing season. You've touched on the issue of Palmer amaranth and what the process has been like with the EPA a couple of times. Is there anything else that you want the committee to know or that needs to be expanded upon?
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. I would be remiss if I didn't take the time to recognize you in this moment for all the support that you give to your constituents. It does not go unnoticed back home that you've stood up for us when we've needed a Section 18. You've stood up for us when we need improved safety nets. That makes a difference for the survivability of our industry that runs deep within these family farms. For me, it's very challenging for our growers. Once you work with farmers, they integrate themselves within your soul. And I had farmers calling me with life and death situations in terms of trying to get this weed under control. Farmers operate on net revenues about 2% or under 2%. So they're one natural disaster away from bankruptcy. And it's not the same when you lose your job versus lose your farm, because these farmers have looked back over the generations and seen their fathers or grandfathers or great-grandfathers struggle and make it through. If they lose that farm, that is a very heavy burden on these individuals. We've seen the impacts of getting that Section 18. Our acreage grew 3,000 acres this year, because without access to a herbicide that would allow them to control this weed, 60% of our growers rent land from other people. They don't get granted access to that land if they don't have tools to control the weeds during that rotation into sugar beets. Sugar beet cooperatives, it's both a right and a responsibility to have to grow those sugar beets year in and year out. So it forced growers to shorten rotations on the ground that they own, and that just creates other epidemic issues for them when they've got diseases and pests that they can't manage through longer rotations. So it's been very impactful to have this product available to us this year.
Well, I certainly appreciate the work that you do on behalf of our sugar beet growers and look forward to continuing to work together to make sure that we continue to expand their crop and their crop yields and make sure that they can keep their farms. Something else that Colorado has led on is around the agricultural right to repair. I believe we passed either the first or second law of its kind in the country right after I left the state legislature, or actually while I was in the state legislature. And I know, Mr. Kipley, that you have expressed concerns particularly around whether it's compatible with Clean Air Act provisions. How would you respond to the concern that right to repair would undermine emissions compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. It does not, number one. Nowhere does it say that if you have the right to repair, you have the right to take your emissions off your tractor. So it's no different than the current rules. What it does allow is it allows you to work on your equipment on weekends and evenings when you can't get a mechanic. It does allow you to call an independent guy if you feel like the dealer's a little bit high. And we've all used independent dealers on our cars because of that reason. And so to take that tool away from a farmer, not allowing you to work on your own equipment just because they're trying to hide behind a rule that didn't exist was really frustrating. And so we were glad to see the EPA came out boldly and said, not only do we not agree with John Deere's assessment, but we also are in favor of right to repair. So thank you for the question.
Of course, thank you for your testimony, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all to make sure that when we're looking at how to preserve, the environmental cause around agriculture, that we recognize that that farmers are our first environmentalists, as has been said, and that we need to be reasonable around the pressures that we can sometimes place on them. Thank you. And with that, I yield back.
The young lady yields back. Now recognize Dr. Baird for 5 minutes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was sitting there listening to the testimony and I should have been paying attention.
It's not a bad thing.
Thank you for having this session, and I really appreciate the witnesses being here. And my question deals, and I only bring this up not because of me, but to kind of set the stage a little. I'm concerned about this weaponizing the pesticide registration and the registration service process and the review process. And that has a problem because it takes away from being able to have some of these important tools, which many of us have made comments about. But in 2022, I introduced the Farmers Deserve Notification Act, and that required 270-day advance notice in the Federal Register should they think about, or should the EPA think about, canceling, suspending, or enacting any new restrictions on pesticides. So my question is for any of the witnesses, do you care to elaborate on that? And since you've all come such a long way, because this is a topic of real interest to me, because it's such a concern to farmers and producers, I'm using that just as a way to set the stage. So if you have anything that you haven't mentioned already, then feel free to do that. And I'm going to start in reverse order. Dr. Larson, start with you. Does that work out?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. I'm very concerned about how slow the deregulation already is for pesticides, but you overlay on top of that the new restrictions with the draft herbicide strategy and all of the strategies that would be coming to get EPA into compliance with its Endangered Species Act obligations. It's just going to slow that process down even further and probably limit the way that those tools can be used without the data and the science to back it up.
Congressman, I'm really happy you asked that question because in our toolbox on the livestock and poultry side, we have two very key tools that we use is formaldehyde and rodenticides. Of course, formaldehyde is not under the pesticide situation, but in both cases, they're extremely important to us. I remember all the way back to my younger days with my dad, and he used formaldehyde in the hatchery and on the breeder farms, killed off viruses and bacteria, and my brother and I have used it throughout our operation. Of course, we use, MSDS safety sheets, and we do everything that needs to be done. And we got high path AI last fall on one of our turkey farms, and after we did all the ODA, USDA clean out and composted the turkeys and everything, dirt floors in these barns. About the only thing that's going to really kill that high path AI virus really well is formaldehyde. And if we didn't have that, I'm not sure that we would have been cleared to put turkeys back in that as soon as we did, which was about 72 days, which was really good. And on the rodenticide thing, again, kind of a quick story, but when I was a kid, we had cats in the barns, and that was the mousers, right? Probably some of you had cats around your house for the same reason. Well, now we have to have rodenticides. We can't have cats in our barns these days. So anyways, rodenticides are very important. In our own particular company, we use a rotating 3 different ones that we buy wholesale. They're all commercially approved and everything. And then our 425 family farmers, each 3 or 4 months, we'll tell them which one that they can come pick up. And they put them in pet-proof boxes, put them all around the barns. And rodents, as we well know, are big carriers of diseases and all that kind of stuff. So if we didn't have the rodenticides to stop that, high path AI, PRRS, PED through the swine industry, we'd have an absolute mess. So those 2 are critical to us.
It's interesting you'd mention the cats because that's an all-natural process, right? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, for us, we want to make sure that any decisions that EPA makes moving forward are based on sound science. That's what the agriculture community needs and really is yearning for. In the state of Missouri, our motto is education over regulation, and we would encourage EPA to do that as well. Unannounced surprise visits to family farms, that is not only their place of business, that's their home. It's where they're raising their family. Nothing that they have done that is in a violation can be fixed within 48 hours. So just having that common courtesy and reaching out to that state local agency to go with them because they have a working relationship with the state, it's going to end up having that overall goal achieved in protecting the environment while protecting agriculture at the same time. So education over regulation and decisions based on sound science.
We've got about 16 seconds, so can you answer that in 16 seconds?
I'll do my best. I would agree a lot with what you just said there. Sound science is very important, and the tools need to be in the toolbox. So when you pull them away from us without the proper timing, it's a real issue, not only for sugar beets, but it's the same for corn and soybeans.
And I suppose, Mr. Chairman, I don't have time to go into dicamba. Do I have those questions? No.
I
Okay.
suppose you are correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Baird. Now recognize Mrs. Hayes for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Kippy, were you done with your answer? Mr. Baird's my friend. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. The EPA plays an important role in ensuring every American has clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, and preserving the health of our environment for future generations. EPA oversight of water quality is crucial to farming, in particular as it relates to PFAS, or forever chemicals, which can enter the environment through pesticides or contaminated biosolids and persist in the water and soil indefinitely. In April, I visited the Litchfield Water Pollution Control Authority in my district to tour their treatment facility and learn how they will use federal funds to reduce phosphorus contamination. These facilities perform critical but often unrecognized work to keep our communities healthy. Mr. Kippy, in your testimony, you pointed out the need to hold those who violate the law accountable for PFAS contamination. I've heard similar concerns from water utilities. Earlier this year, EPA finalized a rule on PFAS contamination and clarified that the intent of the agency was not to pursue certain parties, such as water utilities, fire departments, and farmers. My question is, how does this final rule help farmers in dealing with PFAS contamination, and what role can farmers play in keeping drinking water clean?
You know, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. In South Dakota, we haven't dealt with a lot of PFAS issues. As Farmers Union, we are definitely in support of continued research into this problem, so that we will get back to you with some more specifics.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And in all honesty, I hadn't had a lot of background information on PFAS until we had a huge contamination in one of our most precious rivers. So in my district and in my state, we are hyper aware of the damages of PFAS. So I am really interested. So I'll follow up on that. Starting on October 1st, 2024, Connecticut will prohibit the sale and use of PFAS containing biosolids or wastewater sludge as part of a larger phase-out into law last month. Biosolids have a number of uses in agriculture, including as low-cost fertilizer. Unfortunately, they contain PFAS and lead and lead to wider contamination of soil, water, and crops. Limited resources can be a barrier for small farms and rural utilities in conducting proper testing to prevent contamination. Though the use of biosolids as fertilizer by farmers in Connecticut is not extensive, there must be efforts to spread awareness about this change as we look towards a cleaner, safer future. Mrs. Chin, from your perspective, how can state departments of agriculture help eliminate things like PFAS contamination? And additionally, what can Congress do to foster greater outreach to small family farms that are not typically able to engage with federal regulators and stakeholders? And I can tell you, I absolutely love your answer to the last question about education over regulation. And I'm sure that's probably going to bleed into this answer as well.
Absolutely. It's our motto. But NASDA supports funding federal research for mitigation strategies on the risk of PFAS contaminations in the food supply, cleanup efforts, and avoiding unintended consequences. I think we work together as a partnership with the states and the federal governments and the agriculture community to try and make sure that we can mitigate, do the research that is necessary, and make sure that the farmer is not the one who is left to blame, because many times they did not create the PFAS, they were the recipient of it on their land. So I think it's going to be very important that we do the education over regulation and that we make sure that the farmers are held harmless.
Thank you.
Could I?
Yes, absolutely.
Could I offer a little bit there?
Yes, please.
So we don't have any in our area in Ohio that I'm aware of about the PFAS, but you talked about fertilizer. So you think about it, sometimes the EPA and manure, they talk about toxic chemicals and all this, and what more natural way to fertilize your crops than with manure, right? It's all natural. And just give an example, when we started promoting this to our local farmers some 30 years ago, we were paying them to take the manure from our barns. Now they pay us $25 a ton for our dry turkey manure and $65 an acre for our liquid swine manure. And they all tell us that their worm population in their soil increases like 3 and 4 times because the worms love the all-natural product. So it's a kind of a different way to go at it, but you could reduce it by using more manure and less commercial fertilizer.
Sir, since joining this committee 5 years ago, I've learned more about manure than any one person.
The gentlelady
With that, I yield back.
is very lucky. And the gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the Dakotas for 5 minutes, Mr. Johnson.
I would start by noting Ms. Hayes is right. The PFAS is just nasty, nasty, evil stuff, and we want to keep water as clean as we can in the most reasonable way possible. But I want to turn my attention to Dr. Larson, Mr. Kipley, who is just a great South Dakotan, and he and his wife Rachel are fantastic, fantastic members of the broader agricultural community for sure. But the Constitution talks about interstate commerce in a particular way with a strong federal role there because they didn't want a lot of barriers to a national marketplace, a robust marketplace. I was grateful that both of you called out the Agricultural Labeling Uniformity Act that I did with my friend Mr. Costa from California on the other side of the aisle. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about why you think that's the right approach, and maybe starting by the weaknesses of having a more fractured, balkanized approach toward labeling. Dr. Larson?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. It's very difficult to understand the impacts on human health and the environment from various pesticides. You need formal training and education to understand how to evaluate that. So thinking that we can push it down to the local level and have county commissioners or state legislators try and decide what the risk of a pesticide is very complicated. It should reside within the EPA with the PhD level scientists that are doing those critical and well thought out experiments.
Because at some point we want rigorous and robust evidence to be driving these science-based decisions.
100%, and that can be backed up with the trained and educated scientists that work for the state as well. But beyond that, it should not be fractured down to the more local level.
Mr. Kipley.
So as you know, Mr. Johnson, we live in the northeast part of South Dakota, and our local co-op expands over 2 other states. And if you allow states to make their own rules, you're going to have issues with the co-op sending out a sprayer and not knowing which side of the border he's spraying that day, and possibly spraying on the field by accident across the border, because we do have a lot of farmers that cross across state lines right in our area. And I just think that's an issue that we want to avoid. So getting uniform across the U.S. is the only way that we should be proceeding.
So shifting, Ms. Chin, to you, I loved you talking about cooperative federalism, because of course that's the way it should be. And there is a role, I would think, for states in this space. Talk to us about the appropriate role for states when it comes to labeling or the management of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, others.
So we are operating with EPA under a cooperative agreement to be their co-regulator. And when it comes to pesticide uniformity, we really think it's important to trust the EPA science on the human health aspect of it. We want to make sure that science decisions, sound science decisions, are being made. We also know how important it is when EPA is making a decision that they include the state in those decisions, because we are the ones going out doing those investigations and those inspections on the farms. And when they passed, for example, the Endangered Species Act, and they were trying to make those decisions last year, they made some decisions that had they reached out to us at the state, we could have helped them and prevented a lot of extra work for them. An example of that is the Enlist. Last January, they came out saying that there were going to be some counties in the state of Missouri that were not going to be able to use that because of an endangered species, the American burying beetle. But had they reached out to us at the state, we would have told them about a study the Missouri Department of Conservation had done in conjunction with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services that showed that agriculture practices actually enhanced the habitat for the American burying beetle. So as a result, we spent 3 months arguing back and forth with them, trying to make sure that they understood we were not harming, but we needed to allow these producers to use the products they had already purchased and were sitting in their shed.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I would just observe, Mr. Chairman, that although we had some hyper-partisan comments at the front end of today's hearing, which I think were sort of out of character for the ranking member, it made this committee room seem, I think, more partisan than we're accustomed to being. So I just want to get us back to the culture of the Ag Committee, which is to observe that here we have a majority and minority witnesses alike coming together to note the strengths of the approach that Mr. Costa and I had, again, on a bipartisan basis, trying to embrace this strong science-based role for the EPA, honoring interstate commerce, and making sure our producers have an opportunity both to earn a living and keep the environment safe. With that, I would yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. Appreciate that as well. My home state of Illinois is the #1 producer of soybeans in the nation, and it is the #2 producer of corn. I'm extremely grateful for the hard work our farmers of all commodities do to ensure that we are fed, fueled, and clothed. But I have heard from so many of my constituents that this task comes with unique challenges, from rising input costs to uncertainty with weather to learning to navigate the regulatory landscape on the farm. My first question is for Mr. Cooper. In your statement, you touched on the positive aspects of your working relationship with the EPA, including the establishment of EPA's Office of Agricultural and Rural Affairs. Can you describe this relationship further, as well as touch on what else can be done to improve EPA's understanding of the agricultural sector?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So, yes, in our particular situation in the state of Ohio, starting with the state ODA, the Ohio EPA, we have a really, really good relationship with them, and it's a partnering situation where there's no unannounced, visits. They're calling us up, hey, we're going to come out and do the annual audit and all that kind of stuff. And, there's nothing we can change in our system in, 24 hours or whatever, 36 hours, that's going to make any difference. So we just appreciate that they collaborate with us. And we have a biosecurity problem in the livestock and poultry industry area, right? So it's also very key that when we're working with, with the state or the federal groups, that they respect the fact that we have extreme biosecurity needs from that situation. So I mostly can just say that along with everybody else has talked about collaboration and all that, that's so key. Like, just come and talk to us. And the old line about, hey, I'm the tax agent, I'm here to help you. That's not what we're after here. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. My next question actually now is for Mr. Kipley. You mentioned the importance of the RFS for growers as well as your support for year-round E15. One thing that growers in my district have expressed concern about is the fact that renewable volume obligations are not keeping up with the increasing rates of production, disincentivizing new and continued production of biofuels. Can you speak on what EPA can do to improve this disparity and how EPA can improve the landscape of biofuels?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for E30 in this country. A local ethanol plant up in Watertown, South Dakota, did a study on it and put in, I can't remember the number of cars, but put the chips into a lot of cars, drove hundreds of thousands of miles on these vehicles, found no issues with the regular engines as long as the 2006 and newer vehicle. And so they sell E30 at a lot of places up in our part of the world, and we have a lot of people using it on all kinds of engines and having no problem. So I think that's the number one way we can really boost this up is E30. It's a cleaner fuel. The gas mileage doesn't change. It's not like E85 where you lose your mileage, and you do get a little better horsepower out of your vehicle.
Anything more specific that you think that EPA, though, can do to get us to E30?
Well, they change the rules.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
Okay. My next question is also for you. On the topic of biofuels, one thing that is heavy on our minds across the Midwest and Plains is the 40B tax credit for sustainable aviation fuel, especially in states where bundling is not only economically difficult, but also agronomically untenable. What, in your opinion, can EPA do to advocate for a better outcome for the upcoming 45Z tax credit for biofuels?
Yeah, I think they need to include more ways that all farmers can participate in this program. Feedstocks is going to be a very important part of this, and they need to make sure that it's available for it's an incentive program. It's a choice program. You're not telling anybody they have to change their operations, but it should be things that are feasible for the farmers to do. Like I said earlier, I live 26 miles from the North Dakota border. A lot of times we have snow on the ground before the corn comes out, and sometimes we even have snow on the ground before the beans are harvested. There's not a lot of time to try to plant a cover crop in that situation. So we just need to look at other options that we can do to qualify.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for 5 minutes.
Good seeing you back in that chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Should scare the heck out of some people.
Understood. I appreciate Chairman Thompson doing this today. I share his disappointment and Administrator Reagan not being here in person with us today. I represent the Big First District of Kansas, which is the western two-thirds of Kansas, except for the Wichita area. Farm country has made it loud and clear that they cannot survive when the government burdens them with nonsensical regulations and red tape. My view is that the federal government should support producers or get out of their way. As chairman of this committee's subcommittee on livestock, dairy, and poultry, I'm especially concerned with the nonsensical and costly regulations on livestock producers in my district and across the country, including EPA's proposed rule that would impact the effluent limitation guidelines for meat and poultry processing facilities. By EPA's own estimates, this rule could permanently close between 16 and 53 meat, poultry, and rendering facilities. Understand the same administration has provided grants and funds to increase our number of processing facilities, and meanwhile, this regulation would close between 16 and 53 of them. Makes no sense. Question for you, Mr. Cooper. What impact would the revised effluent limitation guidelines and standards have on your operation and on the animal protein industry as a whole?
Thank you, Congressman. So, yes, it'd have a large impact on us. I was actually talking about this a little bit earlier. We have two main food processing plants, and both of them are different. And many of our peers in our industry and through the National Pork Producers Council, many of the packers stuff, they all have different relationships with the local cities and towns, or they might have their own wastewater treatment plant, and that's what we have in our St. Henry Turkey Harvest Plant. We've been working with the local town for 36 years, and we have a pre-treatment plant, and then they take it from there and then go directly discharge from that. And we worked out between us investments. They've done investments. We've done investments. In our other plant, we have our own self-sustaining sewage plant that we have had for many decades, and we just enhanced and upgraded it. So those two are completely different animals, if you will, and the CLG would only just confuse it between us and the city, or between our own system there. So it could cause even us a lot of problem, and many of our peers. And then you move down to these, say, smaller processors, it would have a big impact on them, because they don't have, they just don't have the wherewithal to handle all the regulations that would come with the ELG.
Disaster. In my mind, it's a hammer looking for a nail.
Yep.
And it makes no sense. Thank you. I not only represent a district with meat processing facilities, but I also recognize these facilities' essential role within our communities in the larger food supply chain. I've urged and will continue to urge the EPA to withdraw this very short-sighted rule. Quick question for you, Dr. Larson. It's good to see you again. Protecting state pesticide preemption has been a long-time priority for me. I know it's been discussed a little bit already. Huge priority for Kansas farmers and ranchers who appreciate the certainty of having one state regulatory agency for pesticide versus several. Describe your experience on this issue. What is at stake if pesticide preemption is rolled back? And do you think Congress should codify protections to state pesticide preemption under EPA's FIFRA as the Farm Bill proposes?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, I do believe that preemption should be codified through this committee. I've experienced it in Colorado for the last several years. They've been trying to overturn statewide preemption. They promise us, don't worry, because there's going to be an ag exemption. But as I mentioned, weeds don't understand county borders, ag borders, the seed travels. So when municipalities decide that they're going to regulate chemistries in a different way, they can lead to a blow up of weed seed that travels and impacts, honestly, the smallest farmers the worst within our communities, because it's irrigated ground, which is most likely flood irrigated. So that seed travels right onto their farm and creates a bigger issue for them, where they in turn may need to use more pesticides to try and control those weeds.
Yep. And the notion of having one agency, the states regulating.
Yeah, the states have to be the co-regulators here. They have the expertise just like the EPA does. The local governments simply don't have that level of expertise.
I completely agree. My time's quickly expiring. On year-round E15, I was going to ask a question, don't really have time, but I would just say it's way past time that we lock in year-round E15. We now have both chambers. You have Republicans and Democrats, Republican and Democrat administrations that have all said they're okay with year-round E15. Way past time to get that done. I know it'd be huge for our ag producers in Missouri, South Dakota, Kansas, and all over the Midwest. So thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Feenstra, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member. I want to thank each of you witnesses for coming today. There's a lot of things that we can talk about. I'm from Iowa. I have the second largest ag district in the country. I have the largest biofuels district in the country. I think if you put all the biofuels together, it would still not be as big as what I have in Iowa. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the EPA and the targeted attacks on our farmers. I hear about this every time I do my 36-county tour when I talk to the ag community of EPA just absolutely going after our farming community. And it really starts with waters of the U.S. I mean, when they tried to regulate every creek, every pond, every stream, actually every puddle against the farmer. And this is so wrong. And it was great to see the U.S. Supreme Court last year through the rule out. But that didn't stop the EPA. The EPA created another rule just as bad as the first rule that was thrown out by the Supreme Court. So now we have the decision of the Supreme Court overturning Chevron, which I'm hoping will curb this executive overreach, but I highly doubt that unless we have a new administration. So, Mr. Cooper, I just want you to talk about the uncertainty that occurs when we have this flip-flopping of EPA regulations. I mean, we had Trump that relaxed it, then we had Biden and his administration come and dramatically change it. We had the Supreme Court try to change it, and we still have the rule, in essence, as it existed a year ago. What is your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, it's tough enough to be in the farming business. anyways, and we have a lot to worry about out on the farm, diseases, biosecurity, commodity prices, it goes on, as you well know, the weather and everything. And then when you have this confusion coming from one of the government agencies, for example, like you say, the EPA, it even just complicates it even more so. And sometimes I kind of liken it to, you know, if you're a basketball player and you didn't have a scoreboard at town if you were winning and losing and you didn't have any rules, I'm not sure that game would be very fair to play. So in this case, with WOTUS and so on, you know, we've sent them, the organization sent them letters with a bunch of questions, and in 3 months, they can't even answer those questions for us.
Yeah. I've tried to talk to the EPA. Obviously, it's too bad Michael Regan is not here because I'd love to have that answer from him also. And what people don't understand, and these agencies don't understand, is the immense amount of paperwork that has to be done to follow these criteria, follow these rules. And then they get penalized if for some reason, for somehow, just like in Iowa this past several weeks, we had immense floods. And all of a sudden, we have overstepped, allegedly, because we've had 20 inches of rain, creating a massive EPA opportunity for fines. So I extremely struggle with that. Thanks for your comments. But by the way, Chin, would you like to comment on that at all? All right, thank you very much. I do want to ask you a question, though. So last week, Senator Crapo and I led a letter to 150 of our colleagues talking about, again, EPA's overreach on the force of a 40% heavy-duty mandate, which includes semis, tractors, and trucks by 2032. I mean, 40% of all lightweight vehicles by 2032 have to be electric. I mean, this is just bizarre, and no one. Everybody understands that this can never happen, and it just won't, especially right now when less than 1% of our sales are electric vehicles. And it's also noted that it's going to cost over $1 trillion just to electrify and create the infrastructure for these vehicles. My question to you, Director Chin, can you talk about how the EVA mandates will impact Americans, especially those in rural America?
You know, one of the biggest challenges that we have in rural communities in Missouri is that we don't have great infrastructure. We can't even get cell phone signal in many areas. So you might drive 25 to 45 miles to find a gas station as well. So not to mention we don't have electrical charging stations either. So I feel like anything that happens should be a voluntary approach and not a mandate. I think we should allow the marketplace to work out itself. And if the market wants to have the electric vehicles, I think that will happen.
That sounds like capitalism, doesn't it? Let the consumer decide, right? And yet the administration has their thumb on the scale for electric vehicles like this and the mandate. It's ridiculous. And we do have an alternative. Again, myself being, my district being the largest biofuels district in the country, we have liquid fuels that can do this. And we can have clean fuels. But it just baffles me why the EPA doesn't want to go down this path. Anyway, thank you for your comments, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto, and apologizes for not catching him in the corner of his eye coming in earlier. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Oh, that's quite all right, Chairman. Thank you for the recognition. I just wanted to briefly mention we have heard from our local citrus producers in Florida, and citrus greening is a terrible scourge on citrus in Florida and Louisiana, in California, Texas, and other areas, that they've actually had a pretty good relationship and course of dealings with the EPA over the last couple of years on several amendments. They're going to be looking for their current labeling for several pesticides that have shown promise with citrus greening, and I'm happy to report that the state of Florida, that is submitting the request for the registrant this week, and the EPA is expected to approve it. So I know different states have different interactions with the EPA, but in this really critical crop for Florida with citrus greening, they've been a valued partner and have been helpful to work with. So I wish you all the best of luck as you're working on your various different applications too. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate all the witnesses being here today. You know, Ronald Reagan said that the government's idea on the economy is when it's moving, you tax it. If it keeps moving, you regulate it. And when it fails, you subsidize it. And I've often thought that that could be applicable to agriculture, because between taxes and regulations, a lot of times We wouldn't have to subsidize if we would just get the government out of the way, but I'm going to actually go to my prepared remarks now, but I thought that was pretty apropos. While the EPA plays a critical role in setting environmental standards, it is essential that these regulators are based on concrete science and grounded in the realities faced by our agricultural producers, so that it continues to hold a pivotal position in our regulatory framework. We must strike a balance between effective management, which we are lacking now, and our agricultural productivity. Many farmers, ranchers, and foresters across Alabama's 2nd Congressional District and in the country understand that their biggest competitor right now is an agency that is supposed to be protecting them and their land. This is a harsh reality we shouldn't really have to be dealing with or accept, but day after day in this administration, we come face to face with these facts. Farming, feeding, and providing for our nation in this world is a vital livelihood that is still needed today and a pillar of our national security. I appreciate you all being here today and look forward to hearing more of your experiences. Dr. Chin, reading through your testimony, I felt the same issues in my district relating to the recent dicamba decision that left many producers scrambling after the purchases for the year had been made. Can you provide insight on how this last-minute nature, this decision, affected your producers?
Yeah, we were really stressed out in the state of Missouri, as were other producers in other states, because we didn't have the certainty. We had the product sitting in the shed, but we weren't sure if we were going to be able to use it. We were very satisfied that EPA made a quick decision with the existing stocks order, and they helped us for the 2024 growing season, but we still have uncertainty for 2025. And
So you don't know what to expect going forward. They could change their mind again, right?
Right, and the biggest challenge is the seed supply. Right now, this year, the seed for 2025 is being grown. And so if that dicamba product is not going to be available, we're going to have seed technology out there, but we're not going to be able to have the crop protection technology to help with that.
Can you couple others together, or is it like if you get the seed, you got to couple this technology with it?
You can use a couple other products with it. However, the rotation helps prevent the weed resistance. And it's very important to have that opportunity, to have that rotation in play. We're very concerned about taking those tools away because farmers need to have choices. And if we lose the dicamba technology, the amount of choices that farmers have are going to be narrower than what they are today.
And weed resistance is a good thing. I pulled a lot of weeds in peanut fields growing up. I'd like for us to maintain some sort of resistance. Mr. Cooper, can you elaborate on increased compliance costs and administrative burdens due to the recent EPA mandates that you have experienced?
So, it's kind of generally, it's just all the paperwork and everything that, comes with it. And again, I've said this before, I know today, but, in our organization, we actually have an environmental manager, but we've had to put a person on with everything we have going on to just handle it properly. But throughout all this, and we've talked about climate change and a lot of different things, sustainability, without the EPA making a company like us do it, and there's many others in our farming world that are doing this throughout the NPPC and so on, we decided 10 years ago, for example, to go landfill free. And at the time, we were doing about 50% was going to landfills of all of our discharges throughout all of our company, and 50% was being recycled or repurposed. And here now, 10 years later, we're at 98% landfill free. Nobody made us do it. And I'm bragging here a little bit, obviously.
Sounds like it, but that's okay.
But last year in 2023, 4,000 semi-truckloads of, let's just say, garbage and trash and different things from our company did not go to landfill. It went to repurposing, recycling. So, I think that if the company or groups like the EPA could work more on incentives and more things to encourage farmers like us to do, that would literally not only help our own company, but it'll help the community and help the government themselves. I think that'd be better than all the regulations and all the paperwork. So.
And I'm concerned just young producers, young farmers trying to get a start. They can't hire an environmentalist. I mean, they don't have those options, right? And so as much as we need young producers, people that will actually take the risk and go into agriculture, we're making it almost impossible. It's almost, my cousin came back to our farm 4 years ago, got out of the Marine Corps. He's trying to get started, and it seems like one thing after another that our government does to prevent him from being actually successful, and that's a shame. But anyway, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time, he yields back his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. And I want to thank Chairman Thompson and the ranking member for holding this important hearing, and thank you to each of our witnesses. I know it's been a long afternoon. As a former commissioner of agriculture, I understand the importance of healthy federal and state relationships. While I am appreciative of our witnesses and their expertise on threatening Environmental Protection Agency initiatives, I can't help but be disappointed, as many of my colleagues have expressed, that the agency, the EPA that is, has refused to engage with this committee and join us to discuss the issues impacting this most important industry. Farmers, landowners, and agricultural manufacturers are among the individuals or the entities most affected by overreaching regulatory changes at the EPA. Our farmers deserve an administration that works with them, not against them. However, the Biden administration has weaponized the EPA to carry out its radical, progressive Democrat agenda. Food security is national security, and several have said that today, so it is imperative that we do not hinder the production of the U.S. agricultural industry through bureaucratic red tape. Director Chin, in my view, under this administration, the EPA has adopted the mindset of dictating rather than working collaboratively with stakeholders. Can you further elaborate on your idea of cooperative federalism, if you will, and how proper coordination with the state departments of agriculture will better the lives of farmers and landowners while also achieving the statutory purpose of the EPA?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think a good example of that was the recent court decision that took dicamba out of the toolbox of the farming community. We in the agriculture community and the state departments of agriculture worked with EPA to share our concerns about that, and as a result, we had a workable solution moving forward. We need to continue examples like that. We need to be working together as one team to protect not only the environment, but the agriculture community. Too often, EPA gets stuck in their little box and they do their work, but they forget to reach out to the agriculture community and their co-regulators at the state departments of agriculture. If we could have more open communication and dialogue, I think we could prevent a lot of the heartburn that the agriculture community has been experiencing in the past with some of their decisions. One of those being the herbicide strategy. We were not brought to the table in a timely manner, and as a result, it's been a really burdensome framework for us to try to implement and to regulate.
Thank you. I agree with everything you said. Director Chin, also, how do you think the EPA should reprioritize its agenda and resources to meet the needs of pesticide developers who are awaiting registration approval and farmers needing those important supplies?
Yeah. Choice in the marketplace is very important for the agriculture community. Right now, it takes 12.3 years to bring a new product to market, and it costs over $300 million. The farming community needs the EPA to be able to make quick and swift actions on that. They've actually increased the fees for pesticide registration to help cover the expense of registration process for these new products. And so we would encourage EPA to continue to prioritize and focus on that, because we're going to continue to need new products out there to help with the weed resistance and to make sure that farmers have a lot of choices when it comes to protecting their growing crops. Also, I just encourage them to continue to do education over regulation. I think that's always a positive, and it will help with the agriculture community in implementing those new technologies.
Dr. Larson, EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs is considering proposals to improve their pesticide registration and review obligations under the Endangered Species Act. One of these proposals would require applicators to utilize the online dashboard Bulletins Live 2 to access extended pesticide labels. Do you believe EPA is missing the mark and disregarding the critical rural broadband improvements needed for many farmers to access these types of online platforms?
Yes, we heard Director Chin say just a few minutes ago that there are a lot of rural communities that don't have any access to cell phone connectivity. That holds true for my production region as well. I do think the Bulletins Live 2 is a very clunky platform, and the timeline that farmers need to go and consult that platform to make any kind of crop protection application decisions is unworkable. Our growers are thinking about a 5-year plan for how they're going to be implementing farming on their particular piece of ground. To have to go in 6 months in advance and try and make some decisions, that's far too difficult of a timeline.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses here today. Mr. Kipley, you mentioned in your testimony the deep concern for forever chemicals known as PFAS. Can you elaborate on the significant impact it can have on our farmers and producers across the country?
Well, I think if it's handled not properly, it could have a very costly situation there, and I think we need to make sure that our farmers are not held accountable for that, and that they are helped if they do have it on their land.
Do you recognize that it's really a chemical that is posing a lot of impact and challenges no matter how you use it?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. I know the EPA has been working to provide a better understanding to the public of what PFAS is and the impacts it can have on air, water, soil, fish, and wildlife. In your opinion, what can Congress do to help address PFAS contamination in the Farm Bill?
You know, I think we just need to do some more research on it. I know we just invested a lot of money into that, and I think we need to continue to look into it and figure out the problem and get it solved.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Langworthy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cooper, as you mentioned in your testimony, EPA published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking titled Potential Future Regulation for Emergency Release Notification Requirements for Animal Waste Air Emissions under the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know and EPCRA. This notice was very concerning since it could be the first step to reverse the 2019 rule that exempts reporting of animal waste air emissions. An exemption, as you know, that received wide support throughout the agricultural industry and first responders. When EPA put out this advance notice of proposed rulemaking, I led a bipartisan letter with more than 40 of my colleagues, many on this committee, urging the agency to refrain from considering this rule to require air emission reporting of certain substances from the natural breakdown of animal manure, which would significantly add significant red tape for farmers and ranchers in an industry that's already very heavily regulated. Mr. Chairman, I would also like to submit this letter for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And with that, Mr. Cooper, if EPA were to overturn the farm manure exemption, could you explain how farmers would comply with this rule? Specifically, how would a farmer or rancher calculate their average emissions that they were producing?
The answer to that question is I have no idea how we would. I mean, it is barely, they're not able to do it themselves, and every farm's different, every barn's different. We have turkeys, we have chickens, we have hogs. They're all different, and quite honestly, I don't see that our barns, we have an air emission problem, and if you flip that over to the nutrients coming out of all these barns, I know some people use the word waste in place of manure, but for us, it's a complete nutrient that we use on all the croplands around us. And we have a waiting list, and I know many of our fellow swine producers in the NPPC also has a big waiting list. So that kind of a regulation would just cause just a big mess and more paperwork for us, and I'm not even sure how we would handle that.
Very good. Thank you. I think we can all agree for extremely hazardous substance, EPCRA is an important tool for local communities and first responders. EPCRA provides necessary information on hazardous chemicals stored locally, how those chemicals are transported, and the consequences in case of potential release of those chemicals into the environment. However, I'm having a very hard time figuring out why a first responder needs to know how many emissions a small family farm is producing. Burdening emergency responders like this is the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm when there's no real emergency. Mr. Cooper, do you believe it's dangerous for us to be overwhelming local first responders with unnecessary reporting requirements when there are actual real emergencies that need to be addressed?
Well, yeah, the obvious common sense answer to that is yes, that would not be good. And in our type of an area, and probably many of the people in this room with me, is that we're a very rural area. So these first responders, these fire departments, most of them are volunteers. And, you know, they're doing a full-time job otherwise, and this is just something they're doing to help out. So to tack on some additional paperwork, some additional regulations, when they should really be just focusing on emergencies and everything that's going on locally. And again, back to the whole manure thing, what's kind of interesting is it's all natural. So You know, here you got a situation where we're talking about pesticides and herbicides and chemicals, and when it gets down to why would they want to call manure a toxic chemical when most people take that manure and put it on their vegetable garden in the fall, and then the next spring they plant their vegetables there, and they eat those vegetables in the summer and the fall after they put the manure on. So I don't think it's very toxic in my case.
Thank you very much for sharing that. The bottom line is rural America should not have to roll with the punches every time that the EPA constructs all sorts of new and expensive rules and regulations. There's far too many bureaucrats dreaming up solutions to problems that don't exist. And we are going to end up running our farmers right out of business and jeopardize food security for American families. Our nation's agriculture producers shouldn't be able to focus on doing what they do best, producing food for the American people, the food that sustains us all without unnecessary distractions. I'm very interested in finding a permanent solution here so that our farmers and our local emergency planning commissions can operate without constant uncertainty from Washington bureaucrats looking to make their jobs more difficult. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Director Chin, can you talk about how the uncertainty about the availability of over-the-top dicamba could affect the 2025 growing season if the EPA doesn't work to approve a new label for dicamba?
Thank you for that question. We're very concerned about the uncertainty moving forward. Our farming community all across the Midwest makes their planning decisions at the end of August, the beginning of September. They're already looking to that next crop year. Right now, we have seed being grown for the 25 season with dicamba. There's not going to be enough seed technology to replace the dicamba seed. We need to make sure that the tools in the toolbox are going to be available to the farmers when it comes to crop protection tools. We need to make sure also that moving forward past 2025, we have certainty for that product as well. Having choice in the marketplace is always good. The competition drives down the prices, and so we want to make sure that the agriculture community has that choice in the marketplace.
Thank you. And Director Chin, could you also speak about the importance of biofuels as a market for agricultural crops and how regulatory certainty surrounding biofuels impacts a grower's planting decisions?
Absolutely. Again, I think it goes back to having that choice of where you want to market your crop. Having many opportunities, whether it's raising your crop for a biofuel or for animal feed, whatever it might be, having that competition in the marketplace is a good thing. And so we want to make sure that the farming community has many choices when it comes to marketing their products and making sure we know what the rules are. When you plant that crop, you need to know what the rules are going to be for that entire growing season moving forward. And in the past with EPA, their decisions have been last minute and have really caused a lot of undue stress on the farming community.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper, your testimony highlights how the EPA's pending rule on effluent limitation guidelines would risk hurting smaller packers and processors in the industry. I know you've already talked about this, but can you talk more about how this rule will affect markets for farms and how it could lead to more consolidation in the industry?
From the slime industry's viewpoint, specifically, they're adding on a lot of these small processors around the United States from some of the grants and stuff like that. And for small hog producers, that works really well for them to be able to haul their hogs into a local packing plant and not have to go 4, 5, 6 hours to a big major one. And so, you know, we start adding in all these different regulations and this whole ELG thing that's going to probably like kick a bunch of them out of the whole processing packing system. That's going to reduce that numbers of packing options. And then when it gets right down to it, some of the local hog producers are going to probably go out of business maybe because of that. And so then that does cause consolidation towards the larger companies, yes.
Yes, and we all know that when we have extreme consolidation in industry that we're not really free people. So farmers in my district are concerned about the EPA's overreach and how it impacts their ability to farm. It is evident that the EPA's expansive and heavy-handed approach is creating significant challenges for our agricultural community. I appreciate your testimonies today on these issues, and thank you for being here. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I want to thank you all for being here today on your own time and your own dime. I know it can be a hardship coming here, but the information that you're providing us today will help us make wise decisions in the future. I thank the chair and the ranking member for for doing this today, because it's important in a bipartisan manner that we do come together and gain as much information as we can. You know, I'm a little disappointed that Administrator Reagan was not here today. I thought we had a good hearing with him last year. He did admit at that time that his mother loves cooking on gas stoves, so I thought that was a big plus. But we've seen time and time again how the EPA's actions have placed undue burdens, hindering American farmers and ranchers from doing their jobs of feeding, fueling, and clothing the world. You know, we need guardrails, but we don't need roadblocks. And right now we have a lot of roadblocks that are hindering America's farmers, ranchers, and producers from doing the best job they can for the American people. With the overturn of the Chevron deference, I hope we can stop federal agencies like the EPA from placing unnecessary governmental regulations on hard-working Americans. Director Chin, thank you for being here today. In your opening statements, you used two terms that I found interesting: cooperative federalism and sound science. What would the world look like today if the EPA followed those concepts in the way they do business?
You know, that's been the base of the decisions that we make at the state of Missouri. We work very closely with Missouri Department of Natural Resources as one team to make sure that we are not hindering the agriculture community, that we're allowing them to have economic development for our rural communities. That is the only economic development in most of our rural communities. I feel like if EPA would work more closely with their sister agencies, USDA and state departments of agriculture, we would start to see a lot of the similar successes that we've seen in Missouri on that federal level. We want to be here to help. And the agriculture community doesn't want to harm the environment. We want to protect it. And so if we could all work together in one direction, I think it would really pay off in dividends for the future generations who want to come back home to our family farms and be successful as well.
In January of 22, the EPA announced the registration of the herbicides Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. However, the announcement also included restrictions of use of these tools in more than 200 counties. This action came right before the start of the 22 growing season, but the agency ultimately corrected course and lifted the restrictions in many of these counties. Several of the counties that were previously restricted from use were in Missouri due to the presence of the American burying beetle. Director Chin, what uncertainty did this cause in our growers and producers with the EPA as a state co-regulator through this process?
There was a lot of concern in the agriculture community. Our department received several phone calls within 2 hours of that release going out saying, I've spent thousands of dollars to purchase the seed and the crop protection technology. Now I can't use it. I can't even find new seed to plant. What am I going to do? So it was very stressful for the farming community. We reached out to EPA. We made them aware of a study that the Missouri Department of Conservation had done in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and it actually showed that agriculture practices increased and it supported those habitats. We did not harm those. Had we been able to have those discussions with EPA prior, we would have saved them a lot of time and paperwork, because we had to make sure in the process of this that our farming community in Missouri was going to be able to use that product. So we started the application process for the 24C that would give us a special local needs label to be able to use those products in Missouri. The day we shipped our packet off to EPA was the day that they changed their decision and allowed us to use those products in Missouri. So we were very appreciative of that, but we were a little bit upset about the undue stress that it was caused to the agriculture community at a time when they really couldn't handle much more.
After the Eighth Circuit reinstated chlorpyrifos for growers, the lack of clarity and guidance from the EPA caused a lot of confusion amongst growers who heavily rely on this critical chemistry, as well as for the state departments. How could the EPA have handled that better?
Sound science is the answer, I believe. I think we need to be looking at what that sound science is, not political science. We need to make sure that we're making decisions based off the facts and that we're doing what's best for the agriculture community. People need to remember that agriculture is about food security and national security.
Director Chin, thank you, and thank you to our witnesses. Once again, the chair now recognizes the member from Ohio, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Federal regulations have a direct impact on Ohio farmers and livestock producers, as well as those throughout the country. With a commitment to preservation of natural resources for future generations, many overreach actions by the United States Environmental Protection Agency have caused instability to farms in my congressional district, impacting our ability to viably produce food for our nation. I am heartened by efforts of the agricultural producers and stewardship of our natural resources, as reflected in recognition in my region by the Wayne County, Ohio Soil and Water Conservation District in its Farm Conservation Award, as well as the H2 Ohio Comprehensive Water Quality Partnership. Of significant importance to the United States agriculture, EPA is working alongside other agencies to finalize the guidance for tax credits that could unleash new opportunities for biofuels to provide new markets for rural America. However, if not modeled correctly or delayed, American agriculture could be locked out of these crucial opportunities altogether. I am also looking forward to moving the Farm Bill ahead to ensure access to sound conservation practices, as well as working more broadly in Congress to address regulatory challenges in agriculture and rural communities. My first question is to Mr. Cooper. OH? Come on, IO? There it is, all right. Mr. Cooper, welcome. And congratulations on 85 years serving not only our home state of Ohio, but as a significant food supplier to our nation. Thank you. Please comment on the reference you made in your testimony to the continuous legal challenges regarding the Lake Erie total maximum daily load in Ohio, particularly given the EPA's approval decision on this matter in 2023. Also, you mentioned stakeholders, including local officials, the US EPA, Ohio EPA, and the state of Ohio, as well as the agriculture sector's significant investments made to protect water quality.
Thanks, Congressman. I appreciate that question. That hits really home because, like I was saying earlier, we have about a third of our total farms are located in the western Lake Erie water basin, and that H2O program that you mentioned has been super popular. I think I heard that that's through the state, about 46%, or through our area anyways, 46% of the local farmers are using that. And from the manure standpoint, we always had a lot of demand for it, but the phone just started ringing as soon as that H2O program come out, and we have this long waiting list of local crop farmers that want to use that. And on top of that, that's a really good program. But then individually, many of us farmers, whether we're CAFO farmers or they're just our local farmers, we already do a lot of sustainability type of things because we live in those communities. We raise our own kids and our grandkids and so on and so forth. So, we do grass filter strips and we do a soil test, manure test, and when somebody buys our manure, they have to have their soil tested. We get that analysis, we get our manure analysis, we take it to a local commercial fertilizer company, and we have them tell that farmer how much manure goes on per acre. So there's all kinds of inner controls that we're doing, and I'm sure that's all across the nation. But in the Lake Erie watershed, I think there's a misunderstanding, or I know there is, because the OSU and some other research groups did some DNA testing at the mouth of the Maumee River going into Lake Erie where the algae blooms are, and they come up with something under 20% of it had to do with animal manure. Okay, so there's another 80%, and so we're doing as much as we can and more, and we're always open for ideas as livestock farmers, but there's 80% that has to do with humans, has to do with commercial fertilizer, has to do with like septic tanks on old farmhouses that need to be fixed and so on. Even, I hate to pick on the city of Toledo, but they dumped 25 million gallons of raw sewage in a major rainstorm into the river. We've never dumped even a gallon in, and if we did, there'd be all kinds of problems. And so we don't quite understand how they're blaming us farmers for these algae blooms when somebody like the Toledo municipality is able to do that and nobody says a thing. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, no, and thank you for your response. If we could get regulatory agencies to be a little bit more pragmatic in their assessment and not stifle the growth of individuals who are producing vital needs for our country to sustain ourselves throughout the long term, as we currently aren't meeting our metrics, I believe that we would all be a lot better off moving forward. Mr. Chairman, I do have one more question. I see that I'm out of time. Mr. Kipley, you're off the hook. I'm just kidding. But I will submit it for the record. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now pleased to recognize gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Finstead, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. I am a proud fourth-generation farmer from southern Minnesota, honored to be raising the fifth. I tell people that I raise corn, soybeans, and kids. Proud father of 7 kids. I'm a John Deere tractor driving, corn planting, soybean planting farmer from southern Minnesota. And so it's great to have so many real farmers here testifying today. Welcome and thank you for what you do and your commitment to feeding and fueling our country. Director Chin, you in your testimony today, you emphasize the importance of EPA's cooperation with farmers and its regulatory partners. In April of 2023, several organizations with a track record of anti-ag environmental activism submitted a petition to the EPA requesting a moratorium on the building of livestock facilities in Minnesota, in southeast Minnesota specifically, citing elevated nitrate levels. Within 6 months of that petition, EPA inspectors arrived unannounced on the land of family farmers in my district, interrogating them and inspecting their farms over the course of several hours, causing additional uncertainty in the midst of peak harvest season. Hostile, unannounced inspections like this only intensify mistrust of the EPA by farmers and producers. And so my question to you is, how can the EPA better communicate with producers to improve transparency and rebuild trust within farmers of this country?
Well, we had the same problem in Missouri when I became Director of Agriculture, and we worked very closely with our Department of Natural Resources to help them understand that any problem that a farmer has, one, was probably not intentional, and that they want to do what's right, and that nothing that has been done is going to be fixed in a 48-hour notification period. So we worked very closely with our Department of Natural Resources to provide that 48-hour notification process so that the farmer could prepare. Not only are you going to their business, you're going to their home. It's where their children are. It's where their parents are. We need to be respectful of that as regulators. I think education over regulation is always the best answer. The farmers want to do what's right because they want to pass that on to the next generation. And I think if we take a more relaxed approach while we are trying to protect the environment and protect agriculture, we're going to see better results moving forward.
Thank you for that. And I think I read this right in your bio. You're a fifth-generation farmer? Awesome. So as a fifth-generation farmer, I could only then imagine your goal is to absolutely ruin your farm and leave it in a horrible position so the sixth generation never has a chance to farm that?
No, that is not it. We're actually bringing our son back home, who is the sixth generation, and it has been a struggle for him because it's really hard on the beginning farming community to find their place and to be able to add value. And the amount of regulation that is out there is very burdensome, and it's scary for them.
So on that note, so I say this quite often as a fourth generation farmer myself, I will tell anybody that farmers are the best environmentalists that this country has. And if I want this farm that's in my family for 4 generations to make it to the 5th, I will do everything in my being to make sure that I am leaving it better than I found it. So that means taking care of my fertility. That means taking care of my erosion. That means taking care of the way I plant and the way I harvest and the way I use compaction or not compaction. And so could you give me a little bit of a flavor of what you've maybe done on your farm or what you see happen in your state in regards to what are farmers doing to improve their farms without the federal government coming in and telling them how to do it? I don't think we tell that story enough. So if you could share something with us, that'd be great.
Well, absolutely. In the state of Missouri, we have an 8-cent sales tax that goes to parks, soils, and water. And so that's the first step that we take in the state of Missouri to protect our environment and our family farms. We're also implementing conservation practices voluntarily to make sure that we're protecting our land for that next generation. On our farm, we want to make sure our son understands how important it is to protect that environment, but also how important it is to protect our livestock. So we're doing things above and beyond. We have concentrated nutrient management plans so that we're making sure we don't over or under fertilize our soil with the natural resources from our livestock. These are just a few of the conservation practices that our farmers implement voluntarily, and we look to do more as the markets continue to provide us more income to be able to make those improvements to the farm, because we don't want my son to be burdened when he receives that farm. We want him to receive a gift.
I appreciate that. I'm running out of time here, so I just want to close with just again thanking all of you, the real farmers on this panel, those that are giving blood, sweat, and tears to our communities, but also committed to your family and the generational opportunities that you're creating for your kids. I see Gary Werdish here also, who is a Minnesota farmer, and he drives a different colored tractor than me, but we get along pretty good nonetheless. But thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Congresswoman Dela Cruz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. The day is almost over. For Texas fruit and vegetable industry, the EPA's inability to expedite the approval process has been a big issue. This is an approval process for new products and for chemical mixes, and it continues to be a huge problem for our farmers and ranchers. For most crops, the EPA takes over 6 years and millions of dollars for the review process before approving a new product for use. When it comes to using the product on fruits and vegetables, that timeline could be longer, sometimes up to 11 years, and millions of dollars more. As a result, many companies simply avoid creating or working on products for American fruits and vegetables. This is a competitive disadvantage for American farmers who are attempting to compete in global markets. So not only does it limit the tools farmers in our country have to use on their crops, but it also means that what few tools farmers do have to use in America, that they're much more expensive because of the limited range of options. So we need EPA to reduce these reviews to take place in both fewer years and cost less money. Both of these things would bring products to the market faster and cheaper, which we all need right now with inflation the way that it is. My question is really to all of the witnesses. As I just outlined, the EPA has a review process for new products, which will be used in crop production, which spans many years and many millions of dollars. In your opinion, how is this harming American farmers and producers? And we'll start over here.
You know, any time that there's new products available and you have to wait to get them, it's costing you money if it's going to make your life better. And so I think that if we can speed that process up and get the tools in the toolbox, that's what we're after.
You know, I think this puts the American farmer at a competitive disadvantage because there's no incentive for these companies to stay in the United States and to do business here. They can go to another country that will be more friendly to their technologies and move that process along faster. But I think the real loser here is the American consumer because the cost of food continues to increase. And for our lower income families, that's a huge portion of their disposable income. So I think at the end of the day, we need to remember what agriculture's goal is, and it's food security and national security.
And I think my reply would be maybe at the next level up that when you think about just the entire government situation and how slow everything is, I don't know if anybody went through the whole passport process, but there was a time where I think it took, I don't know, it was 6 months to get your passport. Like, how can that be, right? So it just seems like there's so much bureaucracy and so many regulations, and I'm not sure what's all going on, but this whole thing is just dragging us all down at the farm level. From, you know, like we got to make decisions like we've all talked like, you know, yesterday. We can't wait till tomorrow. And so it's very frustrating all the way around, as you well know. So.
We know that cost of delay all too well. It cost our growers in Colorado and Nebraska $8 million because of the delay of getting a new herbicide to market, and that was in just 1 year. Prior to that, the year before, our farmers lost 10% of their crop across the board to the weed pressure that we had. I find it curious that EPA is very slow to approve new products, but very swift in imposing new regulations.
Real-world application scenarios, or they're overly restrictive for the crop or product scenario in question. I only have a couple of seconds left, but can you give us an example of what that might look like as far as an impact on our farmers? I'm afraid I just have a couple of seconds, but you're welcome to write me back for answering this question. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentle yields back. Now please recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Congressman Nunn, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Thompson, and to the guests who are with us today. I wish that, Administrator Regan from the EPA could have joined us. Unfortunately, he was otherwise unable to attend this one, although he did attend other testimony earlier today for other committees. With that, it's a shame that we have to have this conversation about what his agency's policies have impacted. Everything from rulings on ethanol and biofuel production, WOTUS, Waters of the United States, vehicle emissions, and so much more. And Dr. Larson, I think you said it best. The EPA has been very quick to regulate farmers, but very slow to actually help farmers answer the questions that they're trying to do to help not only family farms, but to be able to both feed and fuel our country. So with that, I'd like to begin with the work that this committee has done on biofuels for our country. From day one, I have fought, as the guy from Iowa, for year-round sale of E15. I think it's very important. My colleagues and I have sent countless letters to the administration urging them to approve permanent, year-round sale of E15 fuel blends. Additionally, the last time he actually showed up, I questioned Director Regan on hearings just before the biofuel producers would have been forced to halt their production of year-round ethanol. Fortunately, at the last minute, he approved the sale with only 2 days to spare. But in the summer of 2024, we were able to get the ethanol we needed. Look, this administration has overlooked the positive impact that biofuels provide on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in reaching the nation's climate goals that they espouse they are so proud of. Further, it ignores the countless wins that we collectively have secured for our countries in biofuels when it comes to the sale of year-round E15, the continuation of critical biofuels production tax credits, the introduction of more than a dozen bills to advance the production of biofuels, the reauthorization of the Enhancement of Biofuels Development Program, the 2024 Farm Bill that our chairman's leading, and doubling the fund for market access programs and foreign market development programs. The list goes on and on. Look, this is part of America's arsenal for being able to drive both America's ag and energy independence. And so, Mr. Kipley, I'm going to turn to you here. Do you believe the EPA's failure to extend the waiver yet again this year and its impacts are going to have uncertainty on family farms like yours and mine and on corn and soybean growers across this country?
Absolutely. We're always waiting for the numbers to come out. It's not just a recent issue. It seems like the EPA always is slow to get those renewable numbers out. And as far as E15, absolutely, we want E15 year-round, and we'd like to see it go up to E30.
Do you think the ability for biofuels in this country is a net advantage for America's energy independence?
Absolutely.
I agree with you without question here. The administration has said as much as well, but they refuse to make the basic level commitment. Is there a difference between 2024 year-round sales and 2025 year-round sales?
To me, I don't see a difference, no.
I don't see it at all either. In fact, the Secretary of Ag has said as much, and yet still this administration refuses to implement it. Ms. Chin, I'd like to talk with you briefly here on WOTUS. You've been working on this in your state and mine together. We've achieved some success. Unfortunately, it's had to be in the court situation because the EPA has failed to do its job. Let me ask you, you've expressed similar sentiments in your testimony today. Could you share with us and this committee the devastating effects that the WOTUS rule has already had on farmers in the Midwest?
What they can do with their ground moving forward. It is a challenge. They're all trying to figure out how to bring that next generation home, but they're afraid to make changes because while it might be okay today, they don't know what the rule's going to be in 2 or 3 years with an administration change or a court ruling. And so it has held agriculture back from making improvements and from expanding. That's not good for your small, local, rural economies. We're losing businesses all the time in rural America, but agriculture is the one constant. And so we need clarity on WOTUS to make sure that we can protect our family farms and our rural communities and make sure that the states remain involved in that conversation.
Could not agree more, and I hope the EPA hears all of us on this. Last, I want to turn back to you, Mr. Kipley. Look, the EPA has come out. I think every farmer in America is driving a truck at this point, and God bless them for doing so. But the reality is the EPA has said that the rigid tail pipeline emission regulation for light and medium duty vehicles is just going to cripple us. Last month, the National Farmers Union even filed a petition in review of this. Has the administration's push for electric vehicle mandates impacted farmers you represent?
We do have some impacted there, yeah.
With that, I know my time has expired. I'll do a follow-up with you offline. Chairman Thompson, thank you so much for the time today.
I thank the gentleman, and seeing no other members here to testify, I yield to the ranking member if he wants to share any closing comments he might have.
Well, thank you, Chairman, for putting this together. It's been very informative. Mr. Kipley, thank you. Mrs. Chin, thank you. Mr. Cooper, thank you. And Dr. Larson, thank you. You know, there's no profession that is more relied on and dependent on the environment than farming. This has been a monumental hearing. You've helped us go forward and understand better. And I agree with some of the comments. We would have loved to have had the head of the EPA in here. But we will get him in. And some of your comments have helped this committee to pierce with some adequate questions to the commissioner that you all have mentioned here, certainly about the Water Us situation and several other things that you were able to inform us on. So don't think your witnesses and your information have gone to waste. We will get the chairman in here, and we will get some answers. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I also want to add my thanks to, quite frankly, each of our witnesses for making the trip here and bringing your life experiences, your expertise to the table on this issue. The regulatory impact on those hardworking families to provide us food and fiber, building materials, energy resources. I mean, it's a tax. There's just no doubt about it, and it is. And there's a lot that the Environmental Protection Agency, or as I have from time to time called them, the Excessive Punishment Agency, has shouldered on the backs, and many times I believe in a short-sighted way. I mean, we heard testimony that today, the unintended consequences that come from these regulations, imposing climate requirements, things that are good for the climate, quite frankly, like cover crops. But cover crops, we know in certain areas, there's snow on the ground till it's time to put those in. In other areas, it is so dry that if you put a cover crop in, it will suck every bit of moisture out of the soil to where your cash crop will never grow. And so I think we got a lot of good information today, and we're going to use that basically prepare to have the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency before us. We will be sending another invitation. I think we're going to make it a little more firm this time, because it is time for Administrator Regan to appear before the Agriculture Committee. With that said, I also want to say thank you to the staff. All the members that participate, and quite frankly, the staff that work so hard and so professionally. We're blessed with the staff that we have to work with, and they really help us to be able to do our jobs. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture is adjourned.
Good hearing, Chairman. Good hearing.